You're listening to Holiday Gifts for Insufferable People by Abby Wardeman. Read for you by the author. First, a dedication. When most authors write a book, they write with a specific reader in mind. Sometimes it's a stranger they've imagined. Sometimes it's a loved one. Sometimes it's their past, present, or future self. As I started this particular story, I meant to write it for those who were struggling through the tumultuous holiday season of 2020. And yet I had this constant involuntary vision of my father reading it. I can't tell you why. Maybe it's because he had a soft spot for quirky small towns. Maybe it's because he loved Christmas. Probably, it's because my most difficult holiday season was the one I spent with him in hospital rooms, waiting to see if he'd get a new liver. He did. Whatever the reason, it was his laughter I heard with each comedic line I wrote. And that's not excessive confidence on my part. He was an easy laugh. I imagined my mother reading aloud to him, and I pictured Dad leaning forward in his chair to make eye contact with her while he cracked up. He always had to make eye contact through laughter, as if he wanted to confirm that each joyful moment was a joy shared. I wrote with this vision in mind, fully expecting that some version of these imaginings would actually happen. But as it turns out, we lost my dad between the next to last draft and the final polish. So the best I can do is dedicate this story to him. It's true that I also dedicated the last book to him, but, well, our departed get special treatment. We all know that. Plus, I did write the thing for him, however accidentally. Here's to the man who taught me how to look for the light, taught me how to welcome love, and once sagely advised me that there are times in life when you're just gonna feel crappy for a while. Daddy, this is one of them. But rest assured that I can love. I am loved. And I am turning my face toward the light. Chapter 1. Frankie smelled the burning, but it didn't wake her, probably because the smoky odor fit so well within the feverish panic of her dream. She was running down a tight spiral staircase in search of her mother. The walls surrounding her were made of splintered wood that kept snagging her red curls and bubblegum pink jumpsuit. Why had she dressed herself like plumber Barbie? This wasn't her. Why was she never her anymore? The scent of burning intensified. She tried to run faster, but her hamstrings were stone. Her mother was somewhere at the bottom of the stairs, somewhere too close to the flames. She tried to call out for her mom to meet her halfway, but the best Frankie could do was a strained whisper. And yet her mother responded, her North Carolina accent echoing up from below, clear as crystal and chipper as ever. Honey, sometimes you just gotta turn it around and move on. Caleb's dead too, so that's something to think about. At this, Frankie bolted upright, Caleb's name escaping her lips in a choked gasp. For a second, she felt like she'd been torn from one dream and plunged into another. The wood-paneled walls, the French doors on the closet, the sting of the chilled air. This was not her bedroom. But then she recognized the rocking chair in the corner, a staple of childhood story time, and the memories of yesterday eased their way back into her consciousness. The police blaring evacuation orders up and down Chaparral Drive, the eerie orange of the sky in the rearview mirror, the 4-hour drive through the dark and into the mountains, the headlights of Caleb's Subaru occasionally illuminating restaurant and motel signs, welcoming them to the winter wonderland of the Western Sierra. With last night's memories came last night's anxiety. Frankie reached a hand toward Caleb. He wasn't there. There was nothing but the golden streak of sunlight across his pillow. The nightstand where he dumped his keys at 2 a.m. was now empty, except for a stack of Ellen Hildebrand books her mother had left behind. Frankie's heart beat faster. She breathed deep to quiet the growing panic. Caleb was okay, she told herself. He was okay. He was probably running errands in the village. That whole Caleb's dead too business had only been a dream. She tried rooting herself in reality with the scan of all her senses. She could feel the icy air of the cabin on her face, thanks to her mother's busted heater. She could taste her own sour morning breath. She could smell burning. Burning. The dream was gone, but the odor remained. Fire. Frankie flung back the quilts and sprung out of bed, checking the window to see how close the fire was. Blue skies. That seemed like a good sign. The smoke hadn't overtaken this part of the forest yet. They had time. They had time. Caleb was safe somewhere, and they had time. Packing was easy enough to do for herself, as everything was still inside her suitcase except the pajama pants she now swapped for jeans, and the toiletry case sitting zipped up on the back of the toilet. Caleb's things were another matter. He'd already moved his clothes into the dresser, arranged his toiletries in the bathroom cabinet, and plugged his e-reader and laptop into the dingy white power strip beneath the bed. It was very Caleb to get so comfortable so fast, to assume he could just settle in and be still wherever he landed, even when the world was on fire. Frankie dialed his phone as she pulled his suitcase down from the closet where he'd stashed it. Immediately, she heard Stevie Wonder's muffled voice singing "For Once in My Life" underneath Caleb's pillow. "Damn it, Caleb," Frankie muttered as she retrieved the buried phone and shoved it into her own pocket. "I mean cute, but also damn it." She scooped his clothes out of the drawers, then tackled the bathroom, sweeping up the empty wastebasket and holding it beneath the open medicine cabinet. At the side of their prescription bottles, she felt the rush of heat over her scalp and the wild beating of her heart. People die. It's so easy. They die all the time. She tried pacing her breath to stay present and steady. Inhale for 4. With 3 sweeps of her trembling hand, she slid all the contents of the cabinet into the basket. Hold for 7. Caleb's suitcase waited on the bed, the main compartment unzipped and gaping at her in slack-jawed shock. Out for 8. She dumped his toiletries into the suitcase, zipped it shut, and tried to inhale for another 4 while she made a plan. But she couldn't count and think, so she closed her eyes, took even breaths, and told her this would pass. This would pass. This would pass, and she had a plan. She would bring their luggage downstairs, ready to pack in the car as soon as he got back. Then she would bring down the file box containing their important documents, then her recording equipment, and finally, the plastic bin of miscellaneous crap that had been grabbed in confused haste. The framed photo of Caleb's abuelo, a postcard from Frankie's mother that had hung on the refrigerator door for the last 18 months. The previously neglected mini dulcimer Caleb suddenly couldn't bear to lose. Then Frankie would search the cabin to see if anything here deserved rescuing while she waited for Caleb to come home. Wherever he went this morning, it wouldn't have been far. The market, maybe, or a coffee shop. He was probably on his way home right now. This would pass. It would pass. She was safe, Caleb was safe, and this would pass. In for 4. She wheeled Caleb's suitcase to the top of the stairs. Hold for 7. She grabbed hold of the handle and lifted the suitcase. She went 3 steps before she felt warmth on her ankles. Heat was rising. Heat was rising from downstairs. The fire was inside the house. She bolted back up the stairs and grabbed her own suitcase off the bed. She cracked the top of the plastic bin, dug through it for the picture of Abuelo Diego, and jammed the frame into the front pocket of her bag. The file box containing all their paperwork would be too cumbersome to haul out with the suitcase in a single trip. She'd have to carry the most essential files on their own. In her rush, she flipped the top open so violently the box toppled and its contents spilled out across the hardwood floor. No, there's no time for this. Frankie released her hold on the suitcases and swept the files back together frantically, using one foot to retrieve her passport from under the bed. With a luggage handle looped through each arm and a scrambled mess of files clutched to her chest, she stumbled back towards the stairs. The descent was less than graceful, her limbs twisted in the suitcase handles, the heft of her own bag forcing an unintended pivot so she faltered down the middle steps backward. At the bottom of the stairs, a closed door led to the rest of the cabin. Frankie crouched low as she approached it, remembering vaguely from grade school that you're supposed to stay close to the ground so you don't suffocate on the smoke. She tested the door handle to see if it was hot. It wasn't. Good. This was good. It meant the fire wasn't close. At least she remembered as much from her scholastic news. If she could get across the living room through the kitchen and past the mudroom, she'd be home free. She gripped the files closer to her chest, took a deep breath, and flung the door open. The smell of burning wrapped around her like a dingy blanket. Aiming for the kitchen, Frankie scrambled over a braided wool rug on all fours, stopping once to tug a wayward folder out from under her knee. She felt the kitchen door for heat. Nothing. But where else would the fire be coming from? It had to be in the kitchen, which meant she couldn't just come plowing through the door head first. Frankie took a deep breath, gripped the handle of her suitcase, and, on the count of 3, drove the bag ahead of her into the kitchen, forcing the door to swing wide on its hinges, revealing the fire within. There was no fire. There was Caleb, sitting coolly at the kitchen table in his blue flannel button-up, sipping coffee from Frankie's old Berenstain Bears mug, looking like he had exactly as many worries as a J. Crew model. A spindly old man Frankie didn't recognize sat across from Caleb with his own cup of coffee. The stranger gazed at Frankie with gray eyes and warm curiosity. As for Frankie herself, she was still on the floor, one arm looped awkwardly through a luggage handle, that arm's hand pressing a mass of crumpled documents against her chest. Her other arm stretched out in front of her, extending her suitcase into the room, offering it up as an as-needed sacrifice like a vinyl canary in a coal mine. "Mrs. Castellanos, I'm guessing," the old man said. Caleb briefly relaxed his confused brow to correct the man. "Ms. Rose, actually, but you got the right idea." He then looked back at Frankie, refurrowing his brow. Should she be embarrassed right now? She was too disoriented to know for sure. "Caleb," she breathed. There was still a relentless pounding in her chest. "Do you not smell that?" Her husband, now understanding, softened his forehead completely and made that patient, purse-lipped smile she knew all too well. "So, Frankie, this is Clinton Jeffries, our neighbor for the time being." He said this like it answered anything, then added, "Clint came over to get the heater working for us." It took a moment for Frankie to register this information. She heard the dull clunk of the heater kicking on for another round. Suddenly, the smoky odor seemed faint, less consuming. "Your mom used to have a hell of a time with that thing," the old man said. He spoke every statement like he was announcing the birth of his grandchild, his tone proud and full of wonder. "Got to where Cassie just made me my own key so I could get her working again before she arrived for the season. Soon's I woke up this morning, I saw your car in the drive and came running right over to make sure you didn't freeze to death in your beds. Caleb here told me you managed to find 6 quilts. 6! He shook his head, smiling. "If that's not Cassie for you." Cheeks burning, Frankie nodded weakly and hoped that would suffice as a thank you. She slowly rose to her feet. Caleb watched as she gathered the documents together again. "So that's just the smell of the dust burning off. Yeah, no, I got that," she said, a little more sharply than she intended. She was irritated with him for pointing out the obvious when she already felt like an idiot. But then she also resented herself for being irritated with him. It was too many feelings for 8 a.m. on a Tuesday. "Waking up to that smell must have scared you half to death," Clint said. "I think if I'd been through what you've been through, I would—" Frankie cut him off. "No," she said, sighing. I mean, thank you for trying, but this—" She lifted the files with one hand and gestured toward the suitcase with the other. "This is uniquely me." Caleb finally stood then and helped her prop the suitcase against the wall. He touched her back lightly and encouraged her to sit. Frankie watched him pour a cup of coffee and level off 1 teaspoon of sugar. 8 years of marriage, 11 years together, and he still did these things for her, these small efforts to make things exactly right, exactly how she liked them. The guilt of it wrecked her. Even as Caleb remained patient and kind, Frankie only became more difficult to live with. After her mom got sick, she couldn't stop seeing life through the lens of inevitable disaster. One diagnosis, and the whole world turned to glass. "You may not be able to understand it," Frankie's therapist had told Caleb. "Grief doesn't always take the form that makes sense to us. Sometimes it looks like a perfectly rational woman mistaking an argument over an electric bill for the end of her marriage." After that session, Caleb had bought a small dry erase board and posted it in the kitchen. With permanent marker, he drew a blank line followed by the words, "Days since the last catastrophe." He wanted to give Frankie a touchstone of sorts, a measurable reminder that, while the occasional devastation was inevitable, the greater balance of life was safe and good. Frankie had watched as Caleb used a blue dry erase marker to fill in the blank. 78. He had written the number without asking how many days it had been since her mother died. He didn't consult the calendar either. He just knew. He was counting too. And yet their lives revolved around Frankie's grief. Even now, as they sat together on the edge of a new disaster, waiting to hear if the lake wildfire would consume their home, it seemed Frankie's panic attacks still took center stage. She wanted to be solid for him, be a real partner. She wanted to finally stop fleeing imaginary flames. Caleb set the coffee down in front of her. "Dave texted earlier," he said. "Sounds like the neighborhood is still safe. And the wind is blowing north today." "That's good to know," she said. She tried to sound breezy but overshot it and delivered the high-pitched enthusiasm of a children's show host instead. Toning it down, she asked, "Is it any more contained?" "Still only 10%, but the day is young." "You bet it is," said Clint. "Dollars to donuts, you're back in Altadena by Christmas. In the meantime, you two just settle on in here. You better believe just about everyone in Wylde Valley is waiting for you with open arms." "Oh, we didn't tell anyone we were coming," Caleb said. "Except, He twirled his finger in the air, signaling to Frankie that he needed help. "Coralie Caden," she said. "Coralie Caden." Clint chortled at this. Frankie realized it might have been the first time she'd ever actually heard a chortle. "You don't tell things here," he said. "You just live your life and leave it up to everybody else to catch wind. And boy, howdy do they get it done." Caleb caught Frankie's eye and smirked as the man ticked names off on his fingers. "Loretta Schuster, Bill Tennyson, Sarah Metz, Benny Kim, every one of them would have come by this cabin this morning and seen your car in the drive. They know this was Cassie Rose's place, and they know it belongs to her daughter now. Make no mistake, people are out there just waiting for you to drive into town." Just as Clint started lifting the coffee cup to his lips, he remembered one more. "Sergio Valdez." He took a sip. "Honestly, a lot of folks have been waiting to meet you for years." Frankie nodded. "I'll admit that being here kind of feels like an opportunity lost. I always assumed I'd explore Wylde Valley someday with my mom as a guide." "She was here every November to January," Clint said. "I don't know how it's even possible you never made it out here. I tell you, there is nothing like a Wylde Valley Christmas." "I believe it, but Caleb's folks are in Texas. It was just simpler to meet Mom at her place in Pasadena for Christmas Eve and fly out to El Paso the next day." Clint was staring at her thoughtfully now, his head tilted. She braced herself for a scolding, something about life being short or choosing convenience over family. But instead he said, "You know you sound like Susie Pies, only without the accent. You know that commercial? She's got that kind of silky voice like you do." "Oh, yeah, she actually gets that a lot," Caleb said, sharing another covert smile with Frankie. Clint put on a god-awful Georgia accent and raised the pitch of his voice. "For fine holiday dinners or lazy day picnics, ain't no thing like a Susie Pie." Just as Caleb opened his mouth to say that Frankie was the voice of the Susie Pie commercials, Clint added, "That's the kind of voice that'll make a man leave his wife, you know what I mean?" "Yep," Caleb said. "Not a lot of subtext there." Clint laughed. "I'm fooling, though. My wife is the loveliest thing on two legs in applique denim. Speaking of which..." He stood then. I gotta get back. She's been waiting patiently for all the gossip about Cassie Rose's girl. He started toward the mudroom, then turned back to look at Frankie. I'll omit some things. She flushed again. I appreciate it. Caleb walked Clint out, and Frankie got up to refill her husband's coffee cup. As she poured, she gazed out the window at Clint's place across the road. The house itself was set back, partially obscured by a handful of birch trees. Easier to observe was the woman at the top of the drive, shoveling what appeared to be nothing at all while eyeing the Rose cabin curiously. Sure enough, the woman wore a puffy coat over a denim jumper adorned with applique snowmen. Frankie smiled and turned away from the window to explore the kitchen cabinets. She was not prepared for the things she discovered. She had expected to find a few familiar items mixed in with cheap cookware and utensils purchased on sale at Target. Instead, she uncovered all the forgotten tools of her childhood kitchen. She slid one drawer open and was instantly transported 250 miles away and 30 years earlier, to long-lost afternoons spent baking cookies with her mom. There they were, the aluminum measuring spoons, the nesting Tupperware measuring cups in olive green, even the wobbly rolling pin with faded red handles worn smooth from use. Somehow seeing these items in this kitchen made her mother's history in Wylde Valley something real. Not just real, immediate. After Frankie had gone through the solemn motions of letting go, after she emptied her mother's home in Pasadena and sold it to someone who ultimately turned her mother's sprawling wildflower garden into a minimalist desert landscape, here she stood in a kitchen that seemed to claim Cassie Rose was still laughing and breathing with new stories to tell. Frankie couldn't decide if the swelling in her chest was heartache or joy. Probably both. It was often both. Frankie heard the screen door slam and shutter. Then she heard the sound of wheels on the hardwood. Caleb emerged from the mudroom, one hand gripping the handle of a red wagon overloaded with cellophane-wrapped groceries. Clint's right, he said. People are pretty on top of things here. She squatted to read the back of the Last Chance Market business card. A little something to tide you over until you have time to come into town. Welcome to Wylde. Coralie. Sassy sassafras was what Cassie Rose called Coralie. Sorry I missed your call, she'd say. I had Miss Sassy Sassafras on the line, sassing her way through a story about Benny Kim's campaign speech. Frankie quickly learned that Coralie was a woman of many irritations. She did not care for snarky welcome mats, trucks that were big just to be big, or grown women using the word yummy. She hated everything about small-town politics, though she did attend every town hall meeting, and she had a long list of grievances against Deputy Mayor Benny Kim. Coralie loudly objected when the Bear Paw Tavern introduced an open mic night. I talk to every single person in Wylde Valley once a week, and believe me, there is not a thought in this town that needs amplifying. When Frankie asked her mother if there was anything Coralie did like, Cassie admitted that the list was much shorter. But she loves what she loves a lot more than she hates what she hates. Coralie's list of loves included Cassandra Rose, the entire Sierra Nevada mountain range, Wylde Valley, her family, Paiute stories, HGTV, and, Cassie suspected, Deputy Mayor Benny Kim. Frankie had met Coralie a handful of times, but now, digging a box of cheese crackers out of the welcome wagon she'd wheeled into the living room, she was embarrassed to realize she barely remembered the woman. Looking back on the days of her mother's illness and death often felt like peering through a rain-streaked window. All the shapes were there, and she knew what they represented, but she couldn't quite bring anything into focus. Coralie was just another blur, a smudge of black hair and scarlet chenille drifting into view every few weeks to make Cassie laugh and place cups of hot tea in Frankie's hands. She had been kind. Frankie remembered that much. And now she wished she could remember if she had been appreciative enough of Coralie's visits. I never would have thought to do that for someone. Frankie startled at Caleb's voice behind her. He no longer acknowledged her overreactive gasps of surprise, and for that she was grateful. Instead, he reached around her to grab the roll of paper towels. Seriously, how helpful has this wagon thing been? She actually thought of everything. Frankie agreed. It's not even just that it saves us a trip, it saves us thinking, you know? I don't know about you, but I haven't been able to focus on anything today. Trying to buy groceries right now would feel like testing for Mensa. She knew as soon as she said it that this experience was hers alone. If anything, potential disaster heightened her husband's focus. In the 3 hours since Clint left, Caleb washed the sheets, shoveled the walk, called their insurance company, and unpacked his things. Again. Frankie, on the other hand, had just been opening closet doors and staring at things. At one point, she wiped an unidentifiable smudge off the kitchen counter. But that was her sole contribution to the morning's productivity. "I'm sorry I haven't gotten anything done today," Frankie said. "I'm going to get it together this afternoon. I promise." "It's fine," Caleb said. Now he was digging around in the coat closet. "It's not like there's much to do here other than wait anyway. Except maybe figure out what you're going to do about the rest of the book. Hey, would your mother have had a dustbuster? We've got like 6 spiderwebs in the bedroom." Frankie was still a step behind. "The rest of the book?" she asked. Then the realization broke over her. "The book, oh my God, I promised it before the new year. What is today?" "The 22nd. He slid a row of winter coats and snowsuits to one side of the closet to get a better look at the back corner. "Oh, hey, look at this." He knelt into the closet, then emerged holding a stack of Christmas gifts. They were all wrapped in glittery paper, their perfect edges crossed with ribbon. Greenery, candy canes, and 3-dimensional snowflakes stood in for traditional bows. Cassie's elegant handwriting assigned each package to a recipient. Frankie took the stack from Caleb and spread the gifts out on the coffee table. There were 5 of them, each one bearing a different name Frankie didn't know. It wasn't until she read the 5th name and felt her heart sink that she realized she'd been hoping one of them was for her, or at least for Caleb. The absence of her mother's gifts had left an achingly wide hole in last year's Christmas. It wasn't about the presents themselves. It was about the loving ferocity with which Cassie Rose shopped. She took note of every preference mentioned in casual conversation throughout the year, then scoured every department store until she found the item that fulfilled all specifications. The button-up Caleb wore today, his favorite one, had been dug out of the back room by a Macy's sales associate tasked with finding a flannel that was thick and durable but also soft, in green or blue or preferably both. Darker shades were better than light. Ideally, there would be 2 pockets, and if anyone in the back was about 5'8", 150 pounds, would they mind trying it on for her? That was the year Frankie and Caleb got engaged. Frankie remembered arriving at her mother's house that Christmas Eve, eyeing the packages under the tree. And there it was, a gold package wrapped by her mother's hands, bearing Caleb's name. The world had never been so perfect. The 2 people she loved most now belonged to each other too. Looking at the gifts spread out on the coffee table, it was as if her mother lived again, but in someone else's holiday. "Why don't you think she gave these out?" Caleb asked, inspecting a gift as if the answer were in a stylized bow. "Did she forget?" "She did her Christmas shopping year-round," Frankie said. "She probably found them in town during her last summer visit and wrapped them right away." "So, should we—" "I'll take them to Coralie when I go thank her for the wagon. Everybody comes through the market, so I'm sure she can get them where they need to go." Caleb nodded and slid a step stool out of a closet to look at the overhead shelf. "You thinking of going into town today?" "I have to now. I have to see if I can find someone with a recording space so I can get this book done on time. I have my mic and stuff, so it's really just about finding a booth." "Just ask for an extension." "No, there's no reason for that." "What do you mean, no reason? You're in a cabin in the woods waiting to find out if your recording studio is on fire." "Yeah, but I don't have to use that space. I can record anywhere." "In Wylde Valley?" "Someone here has a booth." "That's not where I'd place my bet." "Fine, then somebody has a closet and acoustic blankets, spare mattresses, whatever. Maybe I could even build something in the bedroom walk-in." "Seriously, Frankie?" She hated when he used that tone, like she was stupid for thinking she could solve a problem. "What?" It came out as an angry statement instead of a question. "All I'm saying is that your booth at home is top quality. You can't create an equivalent in this creaky-ass cabin overnight." "I understand the challenge, but so, what, you're just going to send them a janky recording after delivering 6 chapters of perfect sound quality?" Will you just let me do this one thing? Her words were coming fast now. At least let me try to solve a problem. But this is a problem that doesn't need to be solved. They'll let you turn it in late. It's more like you're creating an issue. I am trying to carry my weight. What weight, Francis? There is nothing to carry right now. Just take it easy and wait. That's not what you're doing. I'm just taking care of some things that need to get done. Frankie strangled the air in front of her as she let out an exasperated, "Ah!" Then, do you not hear how belittling that is? I'm not trying to belittle you. I'm trying to tell you that this one thing is not worth doing. You also wanted to take those gifts to Coralie. That's a great idea. Do that and feel good about yourself. Believe it or not, Caleb, I can handle both. She restacked the gifts and reached around Caleb for her coat. I have never asked for an extension in my life, and I am not going to do it now. As she charged toward the mudroom, she added, Mom kept the dustbuster on the floor of the pantry in Pasadena. Maybe try that. She slammed the door behind her and walked the salted and shoveled steps down to the driveway. Chapter 2. Frankie was relieved to discover that the highway between her mother's cabin and downtown Wylde Valley was not the slick and narrow mountain passage she had feared. Caleb had been behind the wheel when they arrived in the dark, so she wasn't entirely sure what to expect. As it turned out, the road was freshly plowed and wound gently through the hills, slipping between quiet cabins and the wide base of the sequoias, their ginger bark glowing in the sunlight, glittering snow climbing the deep ridges of ancient trunks. Frankie felt something inside loosen, let go, and float. When the trees thinned and the village of Wylde Valley came into view, she could see she was perfectly justified in making this trek without a map. Main Street cut a clear, thick line through the center of the valley, with smaller, mostly residential roads branching off of it. According to Coralie's business card, the market was on Main Street, and that was plenty of information, considering Main Street was only 6 blocks long. Wylde Valley did not mess around when it came to the holidays. This was clear the moment Frankie turned off the highway, entering the village under an iron archway announcing the name of the town, each letter wrapped in fairy lights. Greenery wound up street lamps. Giant red bows adorned mailboxes. Most businesses had wreaths on the front door or the occasional menorah in the window. Banners lined the street welcoming visitors to enjoy their holiday among the giants. As suspected, the market was easy to spot. It stood directly in the center of town with a chipped but sizable sign by the road reading, Last Chance Market, your best option for 70 miles. Not exactly an inspiring brand message, Frankie thought, but useful information all the same. She had only just stepped out of the car when a black-haired woman in a scarlet chenille cardigan hurried out of the front door of the market and charged Frankie with arms outstretched. Coralie embraced Frankie as if Frankie were family to her. For a half-second, Frankie was so surprised she forgot to hug back. Francis Rose, the woman said, punctuating first and last name individually, as if she were marveling over a celebrity sighting. I've been so eager for you to visit us, but not like this. She pulled away and looked intently into Frankie's eyes. We'll throw down later over the fact that it took you nearly a decade to find the road up here, but now is not the time. How are you holding up? It took Frankie a moment to mentally catch up with the whirlwind of Coralie. There was a reassuring familiarity here, the soft warmth of her body, the husk in her voice, the vague scent of sandalwood. But Frankie thought, with some guilt, that if she passed Coralie in a Target, she probably would not have known her. I'm okay, Frankie said, after taking a moment to register the question. We're okay. You know, it's out of our hands right now, so there's nothing to do but wait and try not to worry. Coralie frowned, and Frankie had the irritating sense that she had somehow given an incorrect answer. Just as quickly, the woman lifted the corners of her mouth into a smile and took Frankie's hand to lead her inside, scolding herself for having allowed the girl to stand in the cold for so long. Frankie followed at first, then remembered the gifts in the back seat. The moment Coralie caught sight of the perfectly wrapped stack, she twisted her face into a pained expression, tilted her head, and even whimpered a little. They're so Cassie, she said. It makes me ache. Right? Frankie said, feeling a sudden camaraderie with this familiarly unfamiliar woman. The one with the candy cane? No, look at the blue one. Frankie stepped closer to show the detail of the bottom gift. How the glittery blue stripes match the ribbon, which matches the glitter gel pen on the tag. Coralie sighed. Caleb found them in the coat closet. I thought you might be able to help me get them to their recipients. Coralie nodded as she took the packages. Let's get you inside and I'll take a look. The market gave Frankie the immediate feeling of having stepped back in time. The space was small and rustic, bulk produce-filled wooden barrels. Shelves stocked with pantry staples lined the long wall of the shop, and the cleaning supplies and toiletries were neatly organized in the back. The wide wooden checkout counter was partially obscured by postcards, keychains, and rock candy. Are you here to shop or visit? Coralie asked, even as she retrieved a stool from behind the counter. Both, Frankie said, accepting the seat. Not that I have much to get. You thought of everything. Thank you so much for leaving us that wagon. Not at all. I've been where you are. I know what it's like. You've had a fire? Only an evacuation, Coralie said, sitting on another stool behind the counter. About a lifetime ago. I was lucky, but I remember what it does to your brain, being torn from your home like that with almost no warning. My sister invited me to come stay at her place. She's still in our old family home on the reservation in Bishop. But I couldn't bring myself to abandon my house. Plus, her place always smells like cat pee. Coralie spread the gifts out across the counter as she went on. So I got a hotel room as close as I was allowed to be. I spent 2 hours wandering the aisles at the grocery store, couldn't focus, not even on basic things like not starving. She laughed. I wound up back at my hotel room with spaghetti noodles, seltzer water, and a package of cream cheese. Frankie didn't laugh. She was distracted by the wash of relief she felt. It feels really good to hear someone else describe it like that, Frankie said. I feel crazy sometimes. Caleb, he just handles things differently. I noticed. You noticed? What, does everybody in this town have eyes on our cabin? I saw him with your mom. With you, playing checkers like she wasn't dying and discussing politics like she wasn't dying and laying out finger sandwiches like he was at an office party and not a funeral reception. Yeah. Frankie slumped and fingered the ribbon of the nearest package. You know, there was a time when I was the strong one between the two of us. Still funny in the midst of disaster, cool-headed and adaptable. But when my mom got sick, I started getting these panic attacks, and I got so serious. Always on edge, always so delicate. I hope you found a professional to tell you that's normal. Yeah, but normal or not, my strength is apparently conditional. Then I look at Caleb. Honey. There was that sass. Impressive how Coralie could load one word with so much sarcastic incredulity. Tell me this. Did your husband not like your mother? What? No, they were actually very close. But I guess he doesn't miss her. Her death didn't affect him? No, I mean, yes, of course it affected him. What are you... Okay, so he's not stronger than you. He compartmentalizes, which is just another way to cope with oversized pain. Fine, okay, but I'm the only one who's hard to live with. His compartmentalizing doesn't disrupt our lives. I've never canceled plans with a friend to talk my husband through a compartmentalizing episode. There is no such thing as non-disruptive grief. Clearly, Coralie didn't get it. But for some reason, Frankie needed her to get it. Maybe because she wanted to believe what Coralie was suggesting, that Frankie's anxiety wasn't any more burdensome than Caleb's avoidance. And in order to believe it, she had to know the validation Coralie offered came from a fully informed place. Frankie leaned into the counter. Do you remember my mom's farts? She asked. My God, they got so bad. It became like a running joke with us. You know, hey Mom, where have you been farting lately? Stupid stuff like that. Coralie chuckled, but Frankie didn't. It never once occurred to me to suggest that she see a doctor about it. Oh, Frankie. No sass now. Why would you? Old ladies fart. It didn't occur to your mom either, and she was a nurse. Exactly. But it was still a warning sign and we blew it off. I haven't been able to get past it. Now I just see the world through this red flashing frame. A girlfriend takes half a day to return a text, and I start wondering if I should have called the police 2 hours ago. My husband gets short with me, and I think, get ready, he's packing his bags. I know it's not rational. Even in the moment, I know the likelier scenario is much simpler and less tragic than the one I'm envisioning. But somehow, I can know that and be completely convinced that the bad thing is the true thing. I don't know how to explain it. What about meds? My therapist advised against it, just because it would be a thing to come off them later. I mean, this was all supposed to be temporary. Coralie nodded, but said nothing. Frankie let out a long exhale. I really just meant to say thank you and see if you had bagels. We're like Target that way. Come for a little, leave with a lot. Coralie looked at Frankie thoughtfully, like she was trying to gauge whether there was more or if she should let the conversation go. After a second or two of silent evaluation, she turned her attention back to the gifts spread out on the counter. Well, she said, I do know these people, and I expect they'll all be through here before Christmas. You don't mind taking care of it? Not at all. Glad to do it. It's nice to have a little bit of Cassie's signature cheer back in the village. The front door jingled, and a 60-something man in a black leather coat removed his cowboy hat as he entered. With his Wranglers and leather-tooled boots, this guy was definitely working the rugged West look. But it was also clear enough that he hadn't come from roping cattle. His salt and pepper hair was tidy, his hickory skin clean and possibly even moisturized. Coralie greeted him with hands on her hips. This is a private conversation, Benny, she said. Door says open, Benny said. He seemed unfazed by Coralie's glare, possibly amused. Maybe even delighted? You got a closed for private conversation sign? He asked. I'd be happy to put it out for you. What good would that do me? Coralie spat back. Like you can read a sign. You certainly can't read a petition. Come on, Coralie. You know I don't. Regarding the well-being, I don't discuss politics outside of the safety of our children. We only got 11 children in the village, Cora. And you know every one of them has enough sense to look both ways. Coralie raised her eyebrows in challenge. Well, 9 of them at least, Benny said. So 80% of our children live to see adulthood. That's your dream for the community you govern. Cora. And anyway, it's not their sense I'm worried about. It's tourists, speeding through here like they got a Coke sponsorship. We're asking for one sign, Benny. That's hardly a big investment. It's not just about the money. Not just about the budget, you mean. It's always about the money. I know you're in Kyle Logan's pocket, and God forbid that man extend his 4-block commute by 1 second on account of our children's safety. Feeling oddly like a third wheel, Frankie grabbed a basket from the stack by the front door and investigated the produce barrels, only half listening as Benny insisted that Kyle Logan had raised some legitimate infrastructure concerns, and Coralie floated some statistics regarding the number of coyotes struck down by tourists at the corner of Cedar and State. The number was 4, which admittedly did seem like a large number given the specificity of both location and species of victim. By the time Frankie returned to the counter with a full basket, Coralie and Benny were laughing about how the mayor had tried to tough out a flu at the recent tree lighting ceremony, only to pass out onto the tree and send it crashing into Santa's workshop, breaking the leg of a shrieking elf, Sergio Valdez, and forcing Benny to spend a week fielding angry letters from the parents of the town's traumatized children. Well, hey, at least there's only 11 of them, right? Coralie said. We got 60 more in the hills and you know it, Benny said. Don't downplay the challenges of my job. I put my hours in for this town. It was then that Coralie finally introduced Frankie to the man that Frankie had already correctly determined to be Deputy Mayor Benny Kim. Benny offered her a 2-handed handshake and a politician's warm welcome. Then, in a more sincere tone, he told her Christmas wasn't the same in Wylde Valley without Cassie Rose. As Coralie bagged Frankie's groceries, Frankie asked, "Oh, hey, what are the odds you know anybody with a recording studio?" A recording studio? Or booth. Nothing extravagant, but ideally professional grade. Here? I know it sounds crazy, but voiceover artists live all over these days. Or indie bands? Podcasters? Well, Charlie Winston has his alpaca podcast, but that always sounds like it was recorded in a tin can. So I'd hate to send you 30 minutes down the road for whatever he uses. Alpaca podcast? Like tips on raising them or studying them in the wild or what? No, Benny cut in. It's about his alpacas specifically. Daily updates, how they're doing, what they've been up to, things of that nature. He updates the public daily? On the movements of his alpacas? Does he have any subscribers? 86, actually. But you have to bear in mind all but 2 of them are from Wylde Valley. I'm not sure that explains it. Coralie shrugged and handed Frankie her bag. It's different when you know the alpacas personally. Coralie invited Frankie to leave a notice on the market bulletin board asking if anyone had access to a recording space. She also allowed Frankie to leave her car in the parking lot so she could explore downtown on foot. Frankie wasn't quite ready to return to the cabin. While dread still hung over her shoulders, she felt lighter down here in the village than she had up on the hill. The wayward drift of the falling snow, the unrushed conversations between shop owners and their patrons, the solid and eternal backdrop of the surrounding Sierras. It all made Frankie feel a world away from real life and her unsolvable problems. There was nothing to be done in the village, which meant she didn't have to feel guilty about being overwhelmed and directionless. Plus, her mother was alive in Wylde Valley. All the stories Cassie told Frankie had been waiting here, their pages spread wide, images springing to life like a pop-up book. The chocolate shop was just as Cassie had promised. Decadent truffles and gold-trimmed cakes displayed carefully in bold contrast to the phlegmy cough and liberal cursing of Gladys, the chocolatier. "Life ain't no botanical garden," Gladys rasped as she placed an assortment of truffles in a little pink pastry box. "You want a little elegance, you gotta get up off your ass and make it yourself. Your mom knew that. Probably knew it better than anyone except me and Martha Stewart." She handed Frankie the box, now sealed with a foil poinsettia sticker. "There you go," Gladys said. "A little loveliness for this shit can of a Christmas." Frankie left the chocolate shop beaming. Her next visit was to the bookshop, where she failed to meet the often elusive and impossibly shy bookseller, James, but did eventually encounter the shop's mascot, James's one-eyed, rehabilitated squirrel, Alistair. Cassie had told Frankie that the squirrel was like any bookshop cat. If you wanted to see it, you couldn't look for it. So Frankie browsed with forced indifference until she had the eerie sense of being watched. She turned to see Alistair staring at her with one round black eye from his perch on the cash register. After that, she made a quick stop at the hardware store and another at the thrift shop. Without fail, everyone knew who she was before she told them. Some told her she sounded just like the Susie Pies girl, but most marveled at the way she laughed just like Cassie Rose, and almost all of them asked if she and Caleb had anywhere to go for Christmas dinner. Frankie was almost feeling something in the vicinity of holiday spirit when she reached for the door of the Clover Cafe and the handle swung violently away from her. She looked up and found herself face to face with a woman. The woman was a youthful 50, freckles scattered across her nose and faded ginger hair pulled back into a loose bun. As she registered Frankie's face, her eyes seemed to change, growing wide with, was it shock? Panic, even? "You," the woman said, breathing the word like it wasn't meant for anyone but herself. "What?" Frankie asked, also speaking to herself as much as to anyone else. She felt her scalp tingle under the woman's gaze. It was as if this lady knew something. But what was there to know? Was Frankie someone to this stranger? Someone other than the spitting image of Cassie Rose? The woman abruptly cleared her throat and said, "You're in my way," as if that was what she had been getting at all along. Frankie stepped aside. The woman rushed past her and got into her car with the controlled panic of a person being followed. Clover Cafe was probably charming, and Clover herself was probably as delightful as every other business owner in Wylde Valley, but Frankie didn't notice. Something about the woman in the doorway left her with a sense of unease. She couldn't overcome the unsettled feeling that she had some history in this town that she wasn't even aware of, that she had somehow managed to do something wrong before she even arrived. Frankie did ask Clover if she knew how the woman who had just left might have known her, but Clover only shrugged and guessed that the woman knew Cassie, just like everybody else. Too distracted to think, Frankie asked Clover to just box up her favorite 2 entrees. When Frankie stepped out of the cafe with dinner for her and Caleb, the sun was already slipping behind the mountains, gracing the western peaks with halos of pink. It was dark by the time she began her drive back up the mountain. The snow was falling harder now, swirls of snowflakes glinting in the headlights. It would have been lovely if it weren't so disorienting, dizzying even, and the more the snow that fell, the harder it was to make out the edge of the road. Frankie couldn't see anything beyond the reach of her headlights. She just kept climbing higher and higher into the unknown. It's not unknown, she reminded herself. It's the same road it was this afternoon. But she couldn't remember that road. She remembered enjoying the drive down, but she'd been on the side closest to the mountain wall then. Were there drop-offs on the other side? Guardrails? She couldn't remember. Her mind did then what it always did, flashing all the worst possible outcomes in a vivid slideshow of hypothetical tragedy. She might hit a patch of ice, spin into the opposite lane, and be crushed by the force of an unsuspecting truck. Or she could take too long to react to a hairpin turn and drive directly off the side of the mountain. She imagined herself inside the car as it rotated end over end on its free fall toward the valley floor, just sitting in the car with nowhere to go, and all that time to think how offensive it was that her life could break off in the middle for something as stupid as misdirected tires. Living was so sacred, you'd think they'd have made it harder to die. Her heart was pounding now, sweat slicking between her palms and the steering wheel. Bright, oversized headlights flashed in her rearview mirror. A local trying to get home, she guessed. Frankie knew she should find a turnout and let them pass, but her mind presented a new vision of herself misjudging the edge of an overlook and tumbling into the valley. She tried to ignore the flashing lights. "You have a right to be imperfect," she whispered to herself. "You have a right to take the space you need to process your fear." She was trying to remember the third mantra her therapist taught her when the truck behind her sped up suddenly, its blinding headlights seeming to fill the whole mirror. Frankie shrieked and swerved off the road as the truck veered into the other lane. She felt the Subaru bump and slide over snow and wet soil, then lurched to a stop as she impulsively slammed on the brake. Hands trembling, she set the parking brake and turned off her headlights, hoping her eyes would adjust to the dark enough to see what lay beyond the passenger side window. The moon was obscured by clouds, and in the end, the best she could do was confirm that the vague shadows she could make out were far enough away to suggest that she was not teetering on the edge of a drop-off. Frankie turned her lights back on, closed her eyes, and sank back against the headrest. Her heart pulsed loudly inside her brain. She couldn't do this. She couldn't do any of this. Survive another year without her mother, create another life after a fire, be the capable, vivacious wife she wanted to be. She couldn't even get home. In for 4, hold for 7, out for 8. In for 4, hold for 7, out for 8. In for 4, it was pointless. Frankie rested her head on the steering wheel and sobbed. The release felt good, so she let herself go all in, full-on wailing in the dark. That felt even better, until she heard 3 hard-knuckled knocks on the driver's side window. She yelped in surprise and was no more soothed when all she could make out was a lurking man-shaped shadow. "Mrs. Castellanos?" the shadow asked. "I mean, Mrs. Rose?" "Clint." Frankie brushed her face with the heels of her hands, trying to make it look casual, as if a little laid-back tear-wiping could undo the impassioned keening the man had most definitely just witnessed. She rolled down the window. "Hey, Clint," she said. "You can just call me Frankie." "You know this ain't the road?" he asked. The question sounded sincere. "I do," she said. "I pulled over. Someone ran me off. Well, they were going around me, but..." She was suddenly too tired to explain anything. "I'm not used to these roads, I guess." Clint nodded. Happens with city drivers sometimes, he said. Why don't I drive you the rest of the way? We'll take your car up and my wife will follow in mine. Frankie glanced in the rearview mirror and could just make out the silhouette of a woman's head craning out the passenger side window. She was about to say she'd hate to put them out, but Clint was already telling her to sit tight and he'd be right back. Frankie got out of the car to switch seats, mustering just enough strength to wave thank you to Clint's wife. The old man returned, sliding into the driver's seat. Truth be told, I always wanted to test drive this particular model, he said. I tell you, the Lord gives us what we're looking for when we least expect it. He started the car, and Frankie was alarmed to see a deer staring into their headlights. It looked like a doe, still and wide-eyed and covered in snow. Fake. It was a fake deer. Frankie felt her face flush red. Clint, she said, is that a lawn ornament? He followed her gaze through the windshield as he adjusted the seat. Quality, isn't it? Hardware store just got those in last June. Prettiest ones I've seen. It'd look real nice by that Angus fur you got out front, if that's what you're thinking. No, it's just, whose lawn did I plow into? Oh, that's what you're worried about. Don't sweat it. He pulled back onto the road. Guy's an asshole. Frankie felt calmer by the time she returned home. She found Caleb at the kitchen table in front of his open laptop. He looked at her expectantly as she came in. Where were you? He asked. I was starting to worry. Frankie took her phone out of her pocket. I texted you that I wanted to explore the town. She looked at her messages. Oh, I must have had a bad signal. She held the phone out to show Caleb the send failure message. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make you worry. She lifted the bag from Clover Cafe. I brought soup, though. Caleb offered a weak smile in response. Cool, he said. I'm not hungry right now, but I might be hungry later. He looked out the window, then back at Frankie. I guess Clint drove you home? Somehow? In our car? Oh, that. Frankie sat down across from him. I had an episode, just stupid anxiety stuff. What happened? I freaked out a little driving up the hill in the snow in the dark. Then this really aggressive driver ran me off the road. I mean, they didn't mean to. I ran off the road in reaction to them. I don't know. I panicked. Caleb's dark eyes softened. For a moment, Frankie felt like an idiot for all that time spent in the village avoiding home. Are you okay? He asked. Yeah, fine. Frankie smiled. Just embarrassed. I drove through someone's front lawn, and then I was like, I guess I'm just going to have to spend the night here, seeing as how I can't even handle 3 miles of nighttime mountain driving. And then Clint found me wailing like a banshee in the dark. Wailing? Oh, no. It was just stress crying. You know how sometimes I just have to, cleanse? Nothing bad. Caleb took her hand. I'm glad you're okay. His gentle smile had the same effect as the sunlight glowing on the redwoods. She felt her heart warm and lift. He sat back in his chair, thinking. I guess if we wind up stuck here for a while, we'll have to figure out the cell phone situation. Cell phone situation? That's twice today that you couldn't get through to me when you needed to. I know you can handle these roads, but I still don't like the idea of you driving through ice and snow and not being able to reach me. Oh, maybe I could have, she said. I just didn't try. Not on the road, I mean. She wouldn't have guessed that this was a bad thing to say, but Caleb's face clouded over. You didn't try? You were stranded on the side of the road and you didn't call me? Well, it wasn't like that, she said. I just wasn't there that long. Just long enough to cry, alone, in the dark, while also not calling your husband. She felt the heat of frustration pricking the back of her neck. I didn't think... What would you have done? You couldn't get to me. I had the car. He leaned forward suddenly, ticking each idea off on his fingers. I could have called AAA. I could have asked to borrow a neighbor's car. At the absolute least, I could have talked you through your fear. This wasn't a fixable fear, Caleb. There was no salvaging the conversation now. Frankie had officially made it a fight. The sentence was too loud and the sentiment too familiar. So she pressed on. I needed it to be okay that I was afraid. And it would have been okay to me. You should have been afraid. You don't drive mountains and you don't drive in snow. Your night vision is crap. You had every reason to be afraid, but you had no reason to think you were alone. I can't tell the difference anymore. I don't know which fears are right and which ones are wrong. I don't know when I'm feeling something that anyone else would feel, and I can't predict which feelings you'd think are stupid. What? I don't. You do, Caleb. Sometimes you do. And I feel like I can't ever get my mind right, and I'm so sick of coming to you all small and shivering and needy, especially right now when your house might be burning down. Our house, Frankie. This is happening to both of us. Exactly. And I want you to come to me for once. But I don't need anything from you, except to choose my help over a stranger's. I didn't call Clint either. But Caleb was already leaving the room. She shot up and followed him, then stopped abruptly inside the living room door. A noble fir stood proudly beside the stairs, its robust 5-foot circumference consuming nearly a third of the space. Storage boxes sat scattered at the base of the tree, a couple open to reveal long-forgotten ornaments, the hand-painted orbs and clothespin Rudolphs of Frankie's childhood. "You got a tree," she said softly, her voice stopping Caleb at the foot of the stairs. He turned back toward her. "Yeah," he said. "I borrowed Clint's truck and got a tree. I cleared out the dusty-ass shed and killed 2 black widows to get your mom's Christmas decorations. I thought maybe if I could help you focus on the things that make you happy, if I could give you Christmas and a little bit of your mom, you'd be able to get through this fire thing easier." This was, in fact, the perfect plan. Without question, no one alive knew her better. Frankie reached out to touch his arm, but he shifted away from her. "But I don't think I actually can help you, Frankie. I don't think you're going to see the good things until you're ready. And maybe I can't blame you for that. Maybe it's just trauma, but either way, I obviously can't give you what you need." Then he disappeared into the gaping darkness of the staircase, closing the old oak door as he went. Frankie stood frozen, trying to keep their argument in perspective. She focused on a knot in the wood grain. In for 4. This is not the beginning of the end. Hold for 7. He's angry because he loves you. Out for 8. This is not the beginning of the end. She couldn't erase the sense of dread that sat in her gut like a sandbag, but she at least breathed away the panic. Frankie knelt on the floor beside the storage boxes. As she picked through them, she realized Caleb hadn't just taken down the old ornaments. He brought out the old plastic garland that had run across the fireplace mantel in her childhood home. The gold plaster nativity set from Cassie's own early Christmases. The reindeer salt and pepper shakers. Every item embodied Christmas for Frankie in ways her own decorations never had. Perhaps because they came from a time when every Christmas was pure, when every Christmas was snowflake window stickers and fox-shaped cookie cutters, and songs that 100 million strangers all knew the words to. All this time, Frankie had believed that the perfectly coordinated Pier 1 decorations in her mother's Pasadena living room had represented an upgrade. It only now occurred to her that her mother only spent Christmas week in Pasadena. From November to January, Wylde Valley was Cassie's temporary home. She'd spent most of the holiday season here, surrounded by the memories of Frankie's childhood Christmases, back when it was just the two of them. Back when Frankie knew nothing about cooking for in-laws or opening January credit card statements, or pretending Christmas could still be Christmas without one's mother. Back when Frankie was blissfully oblivious to the connection between Christmas spirit and simple togetherness. She remembered how her grandparents fixated on her fatherlessness during the holidays, and how it baffled her. Frankie didn't see any connection between having a parent and having a Christmas. But now she understood that she didn't see the connection because she didn't experience the loss. Her father was a nameless phantom. Meanwhile, her mother loaded every holiday with enough love for 2 parents. And the evidence was here, in the preschool pipe cleaner candy cane ornament that had been carefully preserved in tissue paper year after year for 3 decades. Caleb was right. In the midst of a new crisis, she was lucky enough to be here, surrounded by her mom's love, if only symbolically. If she couldn't feel it, if she wasn't bolstered by it, it was only because she kept guiding her focus away from the good. For her sake and for Caleb's, she had to make a change. She had to seize this opportunity to learn from her mother, create a Christmas designed by love and not by loss, by presence and not by absence. And she would start by picking up where her mother left off. Frankie pulled her phone from her pocket, checked the signal, and dialed. Last Chance Market, Coralie speaking. If you can't find it here, you won't find it for another 70 miles. Chapter 3. Coralie must have delivered one of the gifts already, because she only dropped 4 packages on Frankie's doorstep the next morning. On each one, she had stuck a post-it bearing the recipient's address. Frankie went out to retrieve the gifts first thing in the morning, then set them on the kitchen table, brewed a pot of coffee, and pulled up Caleb's favorite Christmas album, Ella Wishes You a Swinging Christmas. By the time Caleb came down to the kitchen, there was a plate of pancakes and a cup of coffee waiting for him. Frankie was deep in research, her entire left hand lost inside the sea of her curls as she analyzed her gift delivery routes on her laptop. She looked up when her husband entered, smiling cautiously. "Good morning," she said. In the background, Ella Fitzgerald peppily encouraged them to have themselves a merry little Christmas, and Caleb seemed to consider whether he felt like obliging. He stood just inside the doorway, gazing at the pancakes with an expression that seemed more wistful than anything, like he wanted to believe in the promise of the pancakes but couldn't quite get there. He finally returned her good morning in a tone that wasn't exactly cold, but clipped and distant. He took a seat, opened his own computer, and didn't say much else other than to ask why the presents had returned. Frankie tried to focus on patience over panic. He was so tired, she reminded herself. She couldn't expect his anger to melt away overnight. She tried to give all her attention to collecting addresses, copying detailed directions into a notebook in case she couldn't get a GPS signal. One of the gift recipients lived in the village, and another lived along the road between the village and their cabin. This was a relief. The other 2 homes were more remote, but after painstakingly examining both routes through Street View, Frankie discovered that only one required a winding mountain drive, and she felt fairly certain she could handle it in daylight. Caleb was still short-spoken as he refilled both their coffees, but he at least bothered to suggest that she deliver the blue and silver package first. "Why?" she asked. "Hanukkah's already over," he said. "Better late than later." "Oh, of course. I can't believe it didn't occur to me that it was blue for a reason." The recipient, Veronica Schulman, lived just 2 blocks from the market, so this one would be easy. Once she had her routes planned, Frankie dug through the bedroom closet, fairly confident that her mother would have something that conveyed holiday spirit. She found a red plaid sweater with a Scotty dog in the center. Good enough. She pulled it on and checked herself in the mirror. Not quite a perfect fit, but when she smiled at herself and ignored the hair, she could almost see Frankie Rose beaming back, suited up and ready to deliver some cheer. As Frankie collected the gifts and the car keys, she asked Caleb one more time if he was sure he wouldn't need the car for the next few hours. "No, it's fine," he said, not removing his eyes from his computer screen. "Cool. So I've estimated that it will take about 4 hours for all the drop-offs, but I passed the house for the last one, so if there's some kind of delay and I can't get through to you by phone, I'll at least be able to stop by and, physically check in." "Okay." She felt her scalp prickle in irritation again, but she ignored it and went around the table to kiss him goodbye. He half-heartedly obliged, and she caught sight of his screen. "You're looking at apartments?" she asked. "Yeah," he said, "just in case." She frowned sympathetically and ran a hand through his hair. "Thank you for thinking of that. I'm sure it won't come up. I'm sure we'll be back home where we belong before the new year." He nodded, but didn't say anything, didn't look at her, and didn't acknowledge her hand in his hair. It wasn't until she was buckling her seatbelt that she thought to wonder if, when he said "just in case," he wasn't talking about the fire. Veronica Schulman's house was possibly the most meticulously kept property in town, with new red paint on the door, clean glass in the windows, and a freshly shoveled walk. Frankie rang the doorbell and heard it chime inside the house. As she waited for someone to answer, she turned to admire Veronica's snow-covered yard with its ornate iron fence and mountain bluebirds swarming a bird feeder hanging from the branch of a black oak. This, Frankie thought, was the perfect way to find the holiday spirit. She wondered if there was a way to do this every year, deliver gifts to unsuspecting strangers. The door swung open to reveal a scowling young woman in snowflake pajamas, a terry cloth robe, and a chaotic bun. What? She spat the question before Frankie even had a chance to say hello. Taken aback, Frankie blinked, then smiled and spoke in a calm voice to indicate that, no matter who Veronica thought she was, her presence here was actually a good thing. "Hello," she said. "Are you Veronica?" "Why?" It sounded more like an accusation than a question. "I'm Frankie Rose, Cassie Rose's daughter." The woman didn't break her stare. "You remember Cassie? She used to spend summers and winters up in the cabin on the hill?" "Oh, sure, the cabin on the hill. There's only one up there, right?" Despite the jubilant vibes of the mountain bluebirds and her own festive sweater, Frankie was growing irritated. "You don't remember Cassie Rose?" "No, I know who Cassie Rose is. She's dead now, right?" Frankie felt an involuntary scoff escape her. "Yes," she said. "Cassie Rose, my mother, is dead now." "Okay, so what do you want from me?" Frankie felt a bit disoriented. Nearly every person she'd met in the village the day before had an intimate story about Cassie Rose. "Cassie sat with me in the emergency room when I sprained my ankle. My daughter taught Cassie how to Dougie," that sort of thing. So why was this woman the one getting a gift? Frankie looked at the tag again. "I'm sorry," she said. "Are you Veronica Schulman?" "Yeah," the woman said. "But I'm going to need you to tell me why you keep asking that." "You're the only Veronica Schulman in town." Veronica only stared back, daring Frankie to ask another question without stating her business. "Okay," Frankie said. "I guess this is for you." She held out the gift. "Happy Hanukkah." The woman made no move to take the package. "It's not Hanukkah." "I know, but I only just found out that this gift existed. I found it in my mom's coat closet yesterday." Veronica's eyebrows lifted. "That's from your mom?" Frankie smiled, hoping the small show of curiosity meant a softer reception was coming. "Yes," she said. "I think she meant for you to have this gift last Hanukkah." Veronica stared at the package for a moment, then shook her head. Cassie frickin' Rose. Still trying to spread her idiotic cheer from beyond the grave. Before Frankie could even register these words, the present had vanished from her hands and the beautiful red door slammed in her face. Back in her car, Frankie blasted Christmas music in the hopes of reigniting her now extinguished holiday spirit. She sang along at full volume, imagining it was probably the first time in history anyone had ever raged to "Angels We Have Heard on High." She was just belting out a furious "Gloria" when her ringing phone cut off the music. She pressed talk. "Hello, this is Frances." A deep male voice answered. "Hello, Frances. My name is Deshawn Michaels, and I'm calling about your ad for a recording space." "Yes, hang on. Let me pull over before I lose the signal." She settled her car on the side of the road and took down Deshawn's details. He explained that he hosted Cash In, a financial podcast Frankie had actually listened to a couple times. When she wondered aloud how the Alpaca podcast wound up on the town's radar, but Deshawn's didn't, he explained that he wasn't a proper resident. He visited the cabin just a few weeks out of the year and mostly kept to himself. "I built the booth up here because I knew I'd need it, but it's hardly been used," he said. As it turned out, Deshawn's place was just a few miles beyond the gift recipient who lived up in the mountains. The sun was shining and the roads were plowed. the perfect time to venture into the hills. She told him she'd be by after she made a quick drop-off. She could at least knock out a chapter or two today and finish the rest after Christmas, whether she was still here or back home. She was doing it. She was figuring it out. Deshawn hung up and Oria blasted through her speakers again. Frankie turned the dial down, no longer needing to rage. Veronica Schulman was still objectively terrible, but it didn't matter. Frankie was making things happen. The road to the next gift recipient's home did have Frankie gripping the steering wheel, but she managed it with a little self-coaching and the spirit-lifting badoiten-doiten of Jules' Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. "That is one sexy guardrail," she murmured to herself as she slowed to 10 miles per hour, rounding a sharp curve a few hundred feet above the valley. "Look at that thing, all shiny and solid. You got this, but even if you don't, I know a guardrail that does." Angus Coleman had one of those glamorous cabins, a sleek A-frame with floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the mountain range. A creek bubbled through his backyard, and the man himself answered the front door in a Patagonia pullover, graying blonde hair, and a warm smile. Frankie responded in kind, introduced herself, and presented him with his gift. His eyes grew wide with delighted surprise. "You're kidding," he said. "Cassie Rose, oh my God." This was the response she was looking for. "It's a nice surprise, right?" she said, feeling something like giddiness bubble up from her core. "I mean, when my husband found these gifts with her wrapping and her handwriting, it was like she was here again, just for Christmas." Angus made the pouty face one makes when a child does something so adorable it hurts. "How precious are you?" he said. "Seriously, come. There's something you must see. This is going to change your world." Frankie didn't love precious, but she was hardly about to get hung up on word choice. She followed Angus inside, hoping he was about to reveal a new piece to the puzzle of Cassie's life in Wylde Valley. He walked briskly into the living room, its vast windows looking out onto a grove of snow-covered sequoias. Angus stopped at a coffee table made from a slice of redwood trunk. "Isn't it lovely? Custom crafted by a reclusive artisan in Humboldt County," and lifted what was very clearly a picture frame. Frankie's heart leapt. She assumed Angus was about to share a photo of her mom and a story about their friendship. He was not. As it turned out, the world-changing must-see item was just a photograph of Angus with the Dalai Lama. "You do not know meditation until you have meditated in the presence of His Holiness," he said. "He radiates a peace you have never experienced before, a sort of knowing, or rather a not knowing. Do you know what I mean?" Frankie nodded absently, struggling to connect the dots. Angus chuckled. "No, you don't. I can tell by the hunch in your spine that you don't know. You're still carrying a lot of grief, aren't you? Right here." He squeezed her trapezius muscle. "And here." He tapped the space between her eyes with his middle finger, and she instinctively jerked backward like she was dodging a bee. "But that's okay," he continued. "All it means is that you're still learning, still seeking. You don't need pity. You don't need shame. You need loving guidance. Wait here." He handed her the photo of the Dalai Lama and ascended a spiral staircase to the loft. Frankie immediately set the frame back on the coffee table and turned to look at the Wonderland panorama outside the window. Angry heat stung her scalp for the third time in 24 hours. She wasn't sure this pretentious, pseudo-spiritual, self-appointed grief counselor was an improvement over Veronica Schulman. Why had her mother felt compelled to give him a gift? Her thoughts were interrupted by an intrusive tapping of a book on her left tricep. The abrupt way she spun around to face him would have signaled irritation to anyone else, but Angus just wore his same self-contented smile and told Frankie this was the book that would help her find an inner light and hopeful path. I know. Everybody I recommend this book to says, it's a tome. I'm so intimidated. Frankie was fairly certain no one had ever said that to him. Aside from the fact that the book was no longer than the average self-help book, no tolerable human being used the word tome in casual conversation. But in the end, Angus was saying, they always thank me for challenging them to set down their cell phones, get off social media, put in the time, and push through the illusion of loss. Frankie stared at the book in his hands. The Illusion of Loss. How to Release the Life That Never Was. I appreciate that you care, she said with forced grace. But I'm not sure this book is for me. Angus made the over-concerned pouty face again. That's your delusion speaking, he said. This person had apparently meant something to Cassie Rose, and for that reason alone, Frankie kept her voice gentle as she said, I'm not delusional. Ah, but you are. I was too. He tapped the cover of the book. This wisdom got me through a devastating financial setback. I was clinging to false beliefs about what I needed. I was clinging to my pain. This book helped me see that wealth is an illusion. We never really lose anything because we never really have anything. And once I understood that, well, he spread his arms wide, presenting his living room as if Frankie had only just arrived. I mean, a place like this costs a few pennies, if you know what I mean. You mean you're wealthier now that you don't need to be, Frankie said flatly. Angus nodded. Exactly. The problem is my mother was real. My loss is real, and I can't get more of her by wanting her less. Can't you, though? It appeared to be a serious question. Frankie didn't know if Angus thought he was doing Buddhism or Taoism or what, but he clearly missed a few lessons on humility and compassion and the fundamentals of human conversation. She could not work out how she came to be standing in this man's living room. How did you know my mother? She asked. We chatted at the market sometimes, he said. Frankie pursed her lips, nodded, and showed herself out without speaking another word or laying a hand on the intimidating tome. It was only 3 more miles up the road to Deshawn's place, which should have been fine. 3 miles was nothing. At home, 3 miles was a drive to the library, a trip to the grocery store, a Sunday jog. And yet, Frankie only made it a mile before she eased onto a pullout, trembling and breathing deep, frustrated tears tracing a path around her nose. She stepped out of the car, hoping some fresh air would help her find calm. She didn't mind the elevation nearly as much when she was standing on her own 2 feet. It was the finality of being inside a vehicle that panicked her. If she fell off the side of a mountain as a person, she could at least reach for something to hold. She could clamber. She could grasp. She could try. In a car, though, that would be it. The end of trying. She did her breathing exercises as she approached an informational sign helping visitors identify the majestic peaks surrounding historic Wylde Valley. They certainly were majestic. Rugged and impossibly vast, the sunlight casting dramatic shadows in the folds of the snow-capped range. Frankie's heartbeat began to slow again. She looked back toward the car, then spotted a curve in the road ahead. No guardrail. The realization alone made her dizzy, and she knew Caleb was right. It was too much effort for something she didn't even have to do. A lot of needless clambering and grasping. Frankie returned to the car where she sat for a few more measured breaths. Then she called Deshawn to cancel, pulled back onto the road, and cautiously wound her way back to the cabin. Chapter 4. She didn't tell Caleb about Deshawn Michael's recording booth. She knew he'd offer to drive her up there, which would turn her unnecessary mission into his unnecessary mission, and the entire point was to carry her own responsibilities, both real and self-imposed, herself. She also didn't tell him how terrible Veronica Schulman and Angus Coleman were. Instead, she reported that she delivered 2 of the gifts and that both recipients were real characters. Caleb didn't ask for details. He still wasn't saying much. He just asked if she'd be okay with him taking the car out for a while. "Of course," she said. "You really haven't had a chance to explore the town yet. It's immediate Christmas vibes. It'll probably feel really good after spending almost 2 days cooped up in here trying to solve problems." It occurred to her then that getting out together could be really nice for the 2 of them. She imagined sitting together by the fireplace in Bear Paw Tavern, drinking holiday-themed cocktails and watching the falling snow glimmer in the fairy lights outside. She didn't suggest it, however, suspecting that he needed the option of enjoying himself apart from her. He gave her a quick, uninvested kiss on the cheek before heading out the door. When he was gone, Frankie called the publisher to request an extension. As Caleb predicted, the publisher was more than happy to grant her request, extending the deadline 1 week and even offering to help her connect with other voiceover artists in LA who might share their recording space for free, if it came to that. Once that was settled, Frankie made herself a sandwich and perused the to-do list Caleb had left sitting out on the table beside his laptop. Call insurance, crossed out. Check in with B&T, crossed out. Apartment, RB, hardware store, mom and dad. She didn't see anything she could take off his plate, at least nothing that she understood. So she opted instead to focus on giving him a Christmas. She brainstormed a holiday menu, texting Caleb's mother for her turkey recipe and calling Cora Lee to make sure she carried all the ingredients Frankie would need. Then she dug through her mother's Christmas storage boxes in search of wrapping paper and ribbon, having at least had the presence of mind to sneak Caleb's gift into the bottom of her suitcase during the evacuation. She wrapped it methodically, taking care to line up the snowflake pattern along the seam. Frankie placed the present under the tree beside the storage boxes, positioning it so it would be noticeable but not so noticeable that it looked like she needed him to notice it. For a moment, she considered decorating so Caleb could come home to a proper holiday. But it didn't seem right. Decorating was an event meant to be shared with family. When she was a child, she and her mother spent their Black Fridays at home, listening to Christmas music, trimming the tree, arranging nativity scenes, and filling snowman bowls with ribbon candy, all the while drinking so much hot chocolate that Frankie could count on going to bed with an unsettled stomach and no regrets. Decorating with Caleb was different in practice, but the same in feeling. She'd wake at 7:30 a.m. the day after Thanksgiving to the sound of pounding on the roof. She'd pad out to the front yard in her pajamas and find him on a ladder with icicle lights and a staple gun. Frankie would accuse him of starting without her. He'd tell her that's what she got for sleeping straight through the holidays. Then she'd go inside to make French toast for breakfast and sugar cookies for the day. Decorating the tree always made her sentimental, as each year it became a stronger testament to the life they built together. In the early days of their relationship, they each contributed mementos from their independent lives. But as the years went on, they added decorations commemorating their new house and inside jokes and shared friendships. Before long, even the ornaments they brought in as individuals felt like souvenirs of their marriage, each one representing a story told again every year, a story deliberately valued and remembered by the listener. To decorate now without Caleb would be to concede that they were not actually sharing this holiday, just circling it at the same time like 2 separate planets on 2 separate orbits. So Frankie left the ornaments and garland and lights in their boxes. Maybe they could at least hang a couple stockings when he got home. Some small gesture of unity. But he didn't come home until 9:30. At which point she was too discouraged and bitter to tell him that she'd planned their holiday menu or ask what he thought of the village. She went to bed early and woke Christmas Eve morning to the sound of hammering down in the kitchen. For a moment she felt a flicker of hope, but when she came down for coffee, all she saw was a new whiteboard announcing that it had been 456 days since the last catastrophe. She tried reminding herself that the original whiteboard was a gesture of care, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this was an accusation. Frankie didn't acknowledge the new decor, but she did ask Caleb pointedly how he'd liked the hardware store. He told her it was fine, and she couldn't tell if he was registering her irritation or not. They made their breakfasts separately, poured their own coffees, and spoke very little. Just as Frankie was getting up from the table to dress for the day, Caleb announced that there was a wind advisory for the San Gabriel foothills. He said this without looking up from his phone. Frankie felt her heart freeze. "Which way is it blowing?" she asked. "Southeast?" They said nothing else to each other, didn't even acknowledge that this was objectively terrible news. Frankie went upstairs to change, then came back down and asked in as few words as possible if he minded her taking the car out to deliver the last 2 gifts. He didn't care, so she left. "Funny to think your mom was an Angelino." It was almost a snort the way Robert Clampett said it. The lanky man leaned lazily against the doorframe, turning the small package over in his hands. "I mean, she was so nice. So normal, you know? I overheard her ordering a latte at the cafe once. Regular milk, 2%. Not soy, not almond, not oat. Regular milk from a regular cow." "Oh, so you knew the cow," Frankie said. She was tired, and she was done smiling like a bright-eyed idiot in the doorways of assholes. "You know how they are in Los Angeles," he said. "Nothing is good enough the way it comes. Everything's gotta be weird." He did a whispery voice and wavy hand gesture when he said, "gotta be weird." It was not clear what type of person he thought he was imitating. "The milk's gotta be weird," he said. "The churches, too. The politics. Even the dogs." Frankie blinked. "You lost me after milk, Robert," she said. He eyed her. "I guess you're from LA, too." "Yeah." He actually did snort then. "Have you been to LA, Robert?" "Oh, I've been on the 405 a time or two." "So that's actually a freeway. It's not a city or a culture." "Believe me, that is as close as I ever want to come to exploring Los Angeles." "And yet you know so much about it." "You learn a lot about the world when you live in a place like this." "When you never leave a place like this, you mean?" "Exactly. The tourists we get, I met all kinds. Might as well be a world traveler at this point." He shifted his weight off the doorframe and waved his Christmas gift at Frankie. "Thanks for stopping by with this. A lot of folks your age would have just dumped it on the pile for the Salvation Army. Can't be bothered to think about anyone but themselves." But Frankie was already gesturing a vague "it's nothing" with one hand as she walked back toward her car where one last godforsaken gift sat waiting on the passenger seat. She slammed the car door and drove out of Robert's driveway, past the top-quality deer statue and 4 shallow tire marks still vaguely visible under the new fallen snow. The market was on the way to the last house, so Frankie decided to swing by for Christmas groceries before making her final drop-off. She showed her menu to Coralie, who helped her find everything she needed, or at least helped find substitutions for the items she didn't carry. In the half hour she spent in the shop, Frankie dropped a package of butter, tripped over her own foot, and sent a carton of eggs splattering against the floor. It was after this final small disaster that Coralie asked if there was any news about the house. "No," Frankie said, helping Coralie scoop up egg yolks with bathroom paper towels. "But we know the wind is blowing our way today." "Well, whatever happens, we're here for you," Coralie said. "I don't know what your plans are for that cabin, but you have a home in Wylde Valley for as long as you want it." Frankie only nodded, suddenly feeling homesick. Painfully, overwhelmingly homesick. She wanted her life back. Her home, her kitchen table, her bed. She wanted normal and a fighting chance at getting back to who she was before. To distract herself from the lump in her throat, she asked Coralie if there was any chance she carried buñuelos. "No," Coralie said as she carried Frankie's full basket to the counter. "But Clover's got 'em from time to time." "What, seriously?" "From time to time, yeah. I don't know about today, but that's where I'd look if I were you." "Thank you. Wow, I wasn't even hoping. Just asking so I could tell Caleb I did." "He wants them?" He's not expecting them, but we always have them at his parents' house. I'm just trying to find some way to make him happy, trying to give him something that even remotely resembles a familiar Christmas. Last year was not good either. I wouldn't think so. I wasn't me then. I'm not me now, and when I'm not me, we can't be us. Coralie was looking at her with a sympathetic frown. Frankie shook her head and sighed. I just wish I could give him the best of myself, but I'm always coming up short. I guess this sounds a little self-pitying. No, Coralie said, handing her the receipt. I just think you're asking a lot from fried dough. The door chimed then, and both Frankie and Coralie looked to see who had arrived. It was the woman Frankie had nearly collided with in the doorway at Clover Cafe. Just as she had before, the woman froze when she saw Frankie. She stared, looking trapped somehow. May? Coralie spoke the woman's name gently, and May's attention finally snapped away from Frankie. Coralie went on, her voice unrecognizable in its softness, like she was talking to a stray kitten. I got that pumpernickel in for Cody. She nodded toward the back of the store, and May rushed in the direction of Coralie's nod, as though she were late for an appointment with a loaf of bread. Frankie looked at Coralie. She knew. Whatever issue this May person had with Frankie, Coralie knew about it. But as much as Frankie tried to catch her eye, Coralie wouldn't give it. Clover Cafe did not have buñuelos. Well, darn it, the tiny woman said, slamming her brown, tidily manicured fist on the counter. I even thought about making them this morning, but I did cinnamon rolls instead. It's no problem, Frankie said. I knew it would be a long shot. Honestly, I should be able to make them myself by now. I've tried about 4 times, and it's been a disaster every time. Don't feel like trying a 5th time? Not this Christmas. I don't have it in me to face inevitable failure. Not tonight. Clover leaned across the counter and whispered, That's me and cake pops. She pursed her lips and nodded as if to confirm her own confession. I ordered them from the bakery down the block. Kathleen puts different icing on mine so people assume I made them. She put a finger to her lips, and Frankie promised to keep the secret between them. So now, Clover said, is there anything else your guy might like for Christmas? I don't think so, Frankie said. I think I'm just gonna have to do the best I can with what I've got. Clover nodded again, this time affirming Frankie's words. You, me, and the whole world. Frankie smiled her goodbye and stepped out into the parking lot. She was just about to get into her car when her eye snagged on the familiar shape of Caleb. She assumed she was mistaken. After all, he didn't have a car. But sure enough, there he was, just sitting inside the window of Bear Paw Tavern across the road. Baffled, Frankie stepped out into the street for a better look. Caleb was sitting at a table with a man she didn't know, his hand closed around a copper mug. He looked like his old self, so much so that she realized for the first time that he hadn't looked like himself since when? Since before her mom died? Earlier than that? The rumpled flannel and worried brows she'd gotten so used to were now replaced by his neat zip-up sweater and a warm smile. He sat against the back of his chair, looking relaxed, even happy. The stranger, some guy in jeans that didn't fit right, said something that made Caleb laugh, and Frankie felt her heart lurch. She missed him so much then. Missed the creases at the corners of his eyes, and the way he'd keep smiling to himself long after the laugh was over, as if he were relishing not just the joke itself, but the fact that the joke had happened. Frankie tried to remember if she was still able to make him laugh like that. She thought she'd said something funny a couple weeks ago. But was it the same? Was it as good as this stranger could do? She was jolted out of hypnosis by the sound of a car honking behind her. Frankie darted out of the road and dove inside the Subaru, panicked that Caleb would look out the window and see her. She sped out of Clover's parking lot and away from the tavern, leaving her husband to day drink freely with some dude she didn't know. The road to Lady Barnes's place was not steep, but it was long, leaving Frankie plenty of time to think about things. She tried not to, but all her worries seemed lodged in the mud of her mind. There was no pulling them loose without extreme force and an unsettling sucking sound. She thought about her marriage, its fabric thinning and fraying a little more each day. And about the wind blowing 300 miles away, threatening to wipe out everything she and Caleb had built together. And about how she had somehow stupidly believed that she could find her mother in this place, that she could channel a dead woman's grace and make Christmas real again. The familiar anxiety disappeared inside the gaping mouth of her anger as Frankie navigated around ice-coated potholes on a forest road reaching to the back edges of the valley. By the time she pulled up to a small pond beside a worn-looking cabin, she was trembling with rage. Frankie slammed the Subaru shut and rapped loudly on the front door, its chipped paint scratching her knuckles. The baritone barking of a large dog rose from within the cabin, and a piercing voice called, "Who sent you?" Oh, for God's actual sake, Frankie thought. "I'm Cassie Rose's daughter," Frankie called through the door. "I'm delivering a gift. You better get on out of here, Cassie Rose's daughter. I have a gift for you. You got 6 seconds to get your floppy ass off my property. I am trying to fill your holiday with some goddamn comfort and joy." Whether the screaming was about the rage or about being heard over the dog, Frankie didn't know. "What is wrong with you people?" She jumped at the sound of a loud crack immediately followed by the shattering of glass. She turned to see the passenger window of her car blasted through, then turned back just in time to see one of the cabin windows slam shut. "You shot my car?" "Consider that your last warning, Cassie Rose's daughter." Frankie stormed away from the front door, drop-kicking the last Christmas gift into the pond as she went. She peeled back down the dirt road, sped across town, and made her way up the mountain road where nothing good could possibly be waiting for her. Chapter 5. Frankie stumbled through the front door, loaded down with groceries. She dropped the butter first, then the rosemary tumbled out of its bag when she bent over to get the butter. It took her 3 tries to pick up the butter, her agitated fingers unable to properly grasp anything. She cursed under her breath, then cursed more when she heard Caleb's footsteps rushing toward her. She was a raging, shivering, anxious mess, and she couldn't save him from that. Not now, possibly not ever. She was relieved to see that he was on the phone, his cell trapped between ear and shoulder as he grabbed a couple of her bags. His distraction spared her the burden of apologizing for coming through the door like an angsty Charlie Chaplin. Frankie was so tired of apologizing. She was so tired of being difficult and then having to talk about how difficult she was and then having to invest the full extent of her emotional, mental, and physical energy into trying not to be difficult. She watched Caleb out of the corner of her eye as they put the groceries away together. His face was calm and focused as he listened to a murmuring male voice on the phone, but his emotions were quick, almost jittery. He also, Frankie noticed, put the butter in the silverware drawer. A chill settled under her skin. "Where are Jess and Arjun staying? With his folks?" Caleb asked into the phone. "Do you have an address for them?" "I do," Frankie said softly. Jess and Arjun were a couple from their neighborhood. They lived in a charming bungalow 2 blocks down. "Never mind," Caleb told the person on the line. "Frankie has it." A pause. "I don't know, but Frankie will. Gift basket, sympathy card, something. She's good at that stuff." Frankie had stopped putting things away now. She was staring at Caleb, waiting for him to look at her to either confirm or wave off her suspicions. He did neither. He only thanked Dave for calling before wordlessly sliding the phone into his pocket. Caleb rested his hands on the counter and leaned into it, eyes closed, as if trying to steady an internal spinning. Frankie gave him a moment, then asked, "Was that Dave of Dave and Jeffrey?" Caleb nodded. He turned toward her then and reached for her hand. "Jess and Arjun lost their house. The Garrisons, too." Frankie saw it happen. As always, her mind pressed play on a movie she never asked to watch. A rapid time-lapse video of flames coursing down Chaparral Drive, their own home devoured, dissolved to ash. The bistro table on the back patio where they'd had breakfast 3 mornings ago, their down comforter, their mattress, the slippers Caleb had left under the bed. Even the Free World Wildlife Fund calendar that still showed July because both Frankie and Caleb forgot it existed. Even this image flashed through her mind, flames licking the soft shell of a sea turtle. Is Dave and Jeff's house okay? She asked it only to ask something. Obviously, Dave and Jeffrey were fine for now. Yeah, Caleb said. They stood together in silence, each holding the other's hand without feeling it. Finally, he said, "Are you okay if I take a shower?" Frankie nodded. Yes, of course. Go shower." He squeezed her hand and headed for the door to the living room. "Hey, Caleb?" He turned. "How was your morning?" "What?" "I didn't have a chance to ask you when I got home. Did you enjoy your morning?" "It was fine. Pretty standard." She waited to see if there was more. There wasn't. "Okay," she said. "Okay." He smirked. "Glad we got that all worked out." He reached out to kiss her cheek, then went upstairs. Frankie stared at the empty space where her husband had been standing. He wasn't going to tell her. Whatever he was doing in town, it was his alone. He didn't want her to be a part of it, didn't want her to know about it. A secret would have been unsettling enough on its own, but this wasn't just hidden information. It was hidden happiness. He laughed and then kept the joke to himself. He'd leaned back and smiled and drank from a copper mug. He had, for a handful of minutes, actually enjoyed his Christmas Eve. And he had no desire to tell her. She had worried that she wasn't the kind of wife Caleb could share his grief with. But what did it mean that he couldn't share his joy either? This time, the panic didn't seize on her. Instead, it grew slowly from the base of her being, tight vines reaching and wrapping, smothering her lungs and binding her heart. Before she knew it, it was too late for in for 4, out for 8. She was gulping at the air, gripping the edge of the table to steady herself as she dropped into a squat. Frankie closed her eyes tight. "You can't do this. You cannot do it. You're not up for this. Your house will be ash by midnight. Everything you build becomes ash." Yoga breaths, Caleb had told her once. She had been tearing through her mother's dresser drawer for the right bra to bring to the funeral home. Cassie had told her exactly what she wanted to wear, but she hadn't said anything about a bra, and Frankie couldn't send her away with undignified breasts. But nothing in the drawer was lovely enough or supportive enough or comfortable enough, and suddenly she was sitting on the edge of her mother's bed, hyperventilating while Caleb knelt in front of her, combing his fingers through her hair, kissing her forehead, whispering, "Yoga breaths." She tried it now, tried pulling the air deep into her lungs, tried feeling her body expand. But her body was stone. You can't take care of him. How can you take care of him? You can't even breathe. She pulled herself back up and reached for Caleb's to-do list. At the bottom, she scribbled, "Going for a walk, back soon." Her fingers trembled. Her handwriting looked like a serial killer's. Frankie trudged up the road with her peacoat bundled under one arm. She was vaguely aware of the icy air penetrating her sweater, but it felt more like a distant sensation than an immediate reality. The immediate reality was the inevitability of a life lost to the flames. Her wedding dress, her college photo album, her Audi award, the Afghan her mother crocheted, Caleb's favorite sweatpants, the Casablanca movie poster he'd framed to class up his first apartment, the coffee table his father built, the illustrated edition of The Secret Garden with her mother's handwriting on the inside cover. "To my own perfect rose, when I look at you, the whole world is a garden." Frankie's legs fell out from under her, and the sobs came so fast she could barely get enough air to keep up. Snow stung her knees, the world in front of her pixelated and blurred. It was then that a Jeep pulled up beside her. She looked up to see Coralie straining to see her through the passenger side window. "I can recommend a better hike than this one," Coralie said. Frankie only stared back, red cheeks glistening with tears. Coralie pushed the passenger side door open, and Frankie got in. She didn't remember the drive to Coralie's house. Couldn't even say how far up the mountain they went. Coralie didn't demand much from Frankie, aside from a short explanation about how she came to be sobbing by a pile of deer crap. Frankie had not noticed the crap. Other than that, Coralie left the young woman alone to think her thoughts, to observe her losses as they spiraled through her mind on tumble dry low. The gentle rumbling of Coralie's jeep didn't exactly slow Frankie's racing thoughts, but it did turn roars into whispers. Coralie's cabin was rustic in that deliberate way, all stone and wood, with large bulb string lights lining the porch railing and a pair of naughty Adirondack chairs looking out toward the road, as if waiting for someone to come home. Inside, Coralie banged around in a small kitchen where pots and pans hung over a movable island. As she put a kettle on, Frankie wandered the living room, examining Christmas decorations, family photos, and, of course, the framed picture of Coralie and Cassie at Clover Cafe, smiling broadly with their faces pressed together. "I should have come sooner," Frankie said. "I wish I'd known you when she knew you. I wish I'd let her show me this part of her life." "Here," said Coralie, and Frankie jumped, surprised to see the woman standing so close. Coralie was handing her a thermos. "It's hot chocolate," she said. "Put on your coat." Frankie asked where they were going, but Coralie was already out of the room, so she set down the thermos and did as she was told. When Coralie reemerged from a back room, she came holding 2 pairs of snowshoes. "What is happening right now?" Frankie asked. "You needed to get some air, didn't you?" "I guess." "Well, okay. I'm gonna get you the good stuff." A minute later, Frankie was following Coralie through the forest behind the cabin. It took some time to get used to the snowshoes. She kept trapping one underneath the other. But she liked the way the shoes clawed at the snow like she was something wild, something that belonged here. Once again, Coralie let the silence stand. The forest seemed to do the same, pine branches bobbing soundlessly in the winter breeze. Even the birds seemed to call to one another on a strictly need-to-know basis. Towering sequoias surrounded them on all sides, making Frankie smaller to herself and making her fear smaller too, particles of dust in a vast arena. After about 15 minutes, Coralie turned toward Frankie. "You ready?" she asked. "Am I ready?" Frankie repeated. Coralie didn't explain, just forged ahead through a clearing in the trees. Frankie followed her out of the shadows and into the glow. The whole world opened up in an instant. The entire valley, the neighboring peaks, the peaks beyond the neighboring peaks, even a few curling wisps of cloud. It was all here, somehow fitting neatly inside Frankie's always too limited frame of vision. "Nice backyard," she said. Coralie nodded. "No one even mentioned it when I bought the house. They could have gotten a lot more out of me." She opened her backpack and pulled out a blanket, spreading it over a wide, flat rock near the edge of the overlook. "Have a seat," she said. Frankie did. She allowed herself a moment to sit with the world in front of her. When she finally spoke, she was surprised to hear herself start with, "I delivered all the gifts." Coralie exhaled slowly. "I was wondering how that would go," she said. "The fact that you want to talk about that when your house might be burning down is not a great sign. You know these people, right?" "I know everybody." "You didn't think to warn me I might get shot at?" "Oh, no," Coralie laughed. "Lordy, I'm sorry. I didn't know it was going to be that bad." "But you knew it would be some kind of bad." "I didn't know Lady was going to shoot at you." "Okay, but the fact that you didn't even have to ask which one shot at me suggests that you knew enough." "Did she really shoot at you, though?" "She shattered my car window." "But were you in the car?" "No." "Yeah, see? Not so bad." Frankie was laughing now. Or crying. Some of both. Why these people? Why was my mother doling out gifts to objectively terrible human beings? Where was your gift? Where was Clover's gift? Benny's gift? No. Benny is also an objectively terrible human being. Did you not notice the way he's always saying things of that nature because he thinks it makes him sound like an intellectual? Come on. Corley sighed. That's just who your mother was. What? A friend to assholes? Sort of, yes. Not bosom buddies, but she was a nurse, you know? When people cursed and screamed or belittled and condescended, what she saw was pain. She was especially sensitive to it around the holidays. Frankie remembered this. She remembered how her mother used to come home so tired after every December shift. Not body tired, but heart tired. When Frankie was little, Cassie would sneak away to be alone for a few minutes, then emerge from her room with Christmas music blasting, smiling and ready to open a new door on the advent calendar. When Frankie got into her late teen years, her mom was more upfront. I just need a quick cry and then I'm all yours, she'd say. For Cassie, the struggle was in the contrast between the world outside the hospital and the world inside it, between what Christmas was supposed to be and what it really was for a lot of people. So she was trying to create Christmas magic for sad people? Frankie asked. Did it ever actually work for her? Because it did not work for me. I came to these people's doors offering them not just a thing, but my mother's time and consideration. And they didn't even react. They didn't see it. I mean, fine, be difficult if that's where you are, but at least open the damn gift. Yeah, Corley said. It never works the way we want it to. She fixed her gaze on a drifting cloud. I remember your mom once told me, Christmas magic is just knowing that you're loved at the same time that the snow is falling. You know, knowing that you're loved while church bells are ringing. Ice skating in a town square somewhere while you live comfortably in the knowledge that you mean something to somebody. Christmas magic, Christmas spirit, Christmas cheer, whatever you call it. It's just love with a little glitter on it. It's special, sure, but it's not something that just happens to us. It's not something we can just wish upon other people, and it's definitely not something we can manufacture in a day. When you're not at your best, love is really hard to accept and scary to trust. Your mom would say she wasn't spreading Christmas magic. She was planting Christmas seeds. That's why gifts for assholes took priority over gifts for anyone else. I mean, when Veronica Schulman lost her baby boy, your mother couldn't very well put arms around Veronica the way she could if it were you or me. So she bought a little present as a way of telling Veronica she wasn't alone or forgotten, that her grief didn't make her untouchable or invisible, and it was okay if she couldn't rise to the occasion of holiday joy. What happened to him? Frankie asked. Her baby boy. Car accident. He was 3. Frankie winced. She was silent for a moment, then asked, The others? Corley thought. Let's see. Angus is significantly less accomplished and less interesting than his siblings, and in his family that makes him a black sheep. So he keeps looking for connection outside his family by trying to be super impressive, which makes him impossible to be around, which makes him feel lonelier and try harder. Robert had a traumatic childhood, but thinks therapy is for skinny women in New York, so he's just been living with unaddressed PTSD. His wife left him over it a few years ago. And Lady, well, we were never sure about her. Your mom just decided she had to have been in a hell of a lot of pain to be that mean. And the one you delivered? Frankie asked. What's that person's story? Corley chewed her lip and looked at the peaks across the valley as if the answer to Frankie's question was out there somewhere. Finally, she said, I didn't deliver one. There was a 5th package. Corley nodded. I still have it. Why? They haven't been into the market yet? I've just been trying to decide what the right move is. What does that mean, right move? Who does the package belong to? Corley looked at her then. Cody McNamara? She said, watching Frankie's face as she said it. You don't know that name? She asked. Frankie shook her head. I figured as much. Should I? No. From what I understand, you never asked to know it. What did that even mean? Why would Frankie ever have asked? A chill spread across her scalp. Coralie, you're not... It sounded crazy to jump to this conclusion, but a tugging in Frankie's gut told her she was right. Am I related to this person? Coralie chose her words carefully. I know your mom told you a few times she could put you in contact with your father if you were interested. I also know she truly took it to heart that you never took her up on it. Frankie shivered, only now feeling the winter air in her bones. I didn't miss him, she said. Didn't know him. Never needed him. I guess I always thought meeting him could change that. Like, why add this relationship to my life when all it's going to do is make me wonder why I wasn't wanted? My mom was more than enough. Then she felt a squeeze in her heart as a thought occurred to her. Do you think my mom was disappointed by that decision? Did she see it as withholding love? No. Coralie's response came fast and stern. Absolutely not. Let me tell you how I met your mother. Do you know this story? Frankie shook her head. She came into my market one December looking like walking death, all pale, eyes red and puffy. I watched her wander back and forth through the shop for about 20 minutes, looking at the stuff on the shelves, but never picking anything up. Finally, I went over and asked if I could help. She burst into tears and said, I just need dinner, but it's too hard. Frankie felt a literal ache in her arms, wishing she could hold her mom. She had just come from seeing your dad. I don't know if you knew this, but she sent him your family Christmas newsletter every year. Frankie shook her head and Coralie continued. He moved around a lot, but wherever he settled for the holidays, he'd send your mom a postcard with nothing in the message but his current address. Oh my God, I saw one, Frankie said. She was about 13 or 14. It was a postcard of a rodeo cowboy with a Tulsa address scrawled on the back in barely legible handwriting. Her mom told her it was just a friend sending their new address, an answer too boring to investigate further. Did they talk often? Frankie asked. They didn't talk at all. He only asked to see photos of you and know what you were up to, and she made it happen in the form of the Christmas letter. But she was crystal clear that he wasn't getting contact unless you asked for it. Did he want contact? The question came out on impulse, and Frankie immediately regretted it. Just asking sent a flutter of nerves through her stomach. She needed a yes, and she hated that she needed a yes. He did, Coralie said. But according to your mother, he never pushed. Your father failed you, but he was never in denial about it. He accepted everything he felt he deserved. Then, one year, this was after you were grown, she got a postcard that said, Please come, I'm sick. And that's what brought your mom to Wylde Valley for the first time. What kind of sick? Alzheimer's. He wanted to see her just to see her, and he wanted to ask in person if she thought you might change your mind if you knew. He told her that the little family he should have had with the two of you was the closest he'd ever come to building something worthwhile in his life. He wanted you to have a place in his memories. Not just your pictures, but the real you. He asked her to tell you that. She didn't. I know. She decided not to the night she came into my market. I took her up to my cabin and made her dinner, which she barely touched, and she told me everything. She told me about his nomadic childhood, about how he panicked and left when she got pregnant, about how it took him too long to figure out that the thing he was wandering the world in search of was the very thing he abandoned. And she told me she couldn't justify telling you any of this. Why not? Because it would change your mind. She was afraid you would agree to see him out of a sense of obligation, and she wanted you to have the full freedom to distribute your love and mercy on your own terms, without emotional manipulation. Frankie breathed deep and focused on the lowest branch of a sequoia to still her spinning mind. After a moment, she said, I can't decide whether I agree with that choice. Neither could I, said Coralie, which is why I haven't delivered the gift yet, even though I definitely had the opportunity. I've just been feeling like, who am I to take this away from you? Take away the knowledge, the option. You had the opportunity? Has he been in town? Is there any chance I passed him and didn't know? Not him. May. The angsty ginger who came into the market this morning? That's his sister. She looks after him. So that lady does know who I am. Like, intimately. She knows me, and the whole town knows that. Oh, no. Cody mostly keeps to himself, so no one knows him all that well to begin with. And no one knows there's any connection between him and your mom. In the beginning, she started coming up here just to visit your dad once at Christmas. But then she and I became close. She fell in love with the town, and before you knew it, she was shopping for a cabin so she could make Wylde Valley her second home. Cassie Rose is many things to the people in this town, but ex-wife to the quiet guy in the hills is not one of them. So, what, am I supposed to go see him? Is that the right thing to do? The world was spinning now. I gotta go plant Christmas seeds like my mother would have? Girl, no. The whole point of that story was that even your mom in her bleeding heart understood that love is a gift we choose to give. We have to offer it up when we believe it's the right choice, but we also draw boundaries when loving someone else means being awful to ourselves. Frankie didn't know whether reaching out to Cody McNamara would be a gesture of love or an act of needless self-harm. She knew it wouldn't be easy. It would likely be painful in ways she couldn't predict. But would the pain be great enough to justify withholding the gift? How was she supposed to measure a thing like that? At what point did the sacrifice become too much? She thought of Caleb then. An icy breeze combed fingers through her hair, and she pulled her coat tighter around her ribs. How do you know when it's time to draw that boundary? She asked Coralie. Or draw it for somebody else. What are you talking about? I think my husband needs to leave me. How the hell did you get that from this conversation? I don't think he can love me without hurting himself. She felt her voice catch. I make everything that's already hard 10 times harder. I thought I was this steady, resilient person, but I'm not, Coralie. I'm jumpy and paranoid and accusing. I make him work so hard to help me find peace that he barely has the space to take care of himself. There is no joy in the life he shares with me. None. Coralie set her thermos on the rock with such authority that the cracking sound it made echoed out over the valley. Real talk, okay? Frankie braced herself. If Caleb is overwhelmed by the burden of loving you, it's not because the burden is so big. It's because you won't share it with him. I know. I'm trying to... No. I'm not talking about the burden of loving each other. I am talking about the burden of loving you. This one mortal man is stuck trying to give you all the patience and understanding you need because you won't give yourself any. And as long as you keep obsessing over your guilt and self-resentment, you can't even grant him the satisfaction of seeing his love accepted. I believe it was Frankie Rose herself who once said, "Be difficult if that's where you are, but at least open the damn gift." The two women were silent after that. The cloud shifted, casting golden light over Wylde Valley. I didn't like that, Frankie said quietly. It felt really crappy to hear that. Good. Really uncomfortable, because I'm right. Yeah. Frankie's phone vibrated then. You even get a signal out here, she said, fishing the phone out of her coat pocket. I know. Prime real estate. You're not kidding. Frankie looked at her screen. It was a text from Jessica, of Jessica and Arjun. Frankie, I don't know what to say. I am so sorry. Chapter 6. Caleb was not in the kitchen. He was not in the living room, in the bathroom, or in the bedroom. The car was still in the drive, so if he left on foot. Frankie tried the back deck, and that was when she noticed the storage shed, its roof lit with icicle lights and its door ajar. She crossed the yard and swung the shed door open, expecting to see Caleb sorting through old boxes or dust-busting more spiders to keep his mind off the thought of their home burnt to nothing. But he wasn't there. Neither were the storage boxes. The space was now furnished with thick, wall-to-wall, floor-to-ceiling curtains and 2 layers of a stained second-hand carpet. In the corner was a space heater and the small recliner from the living room. In her rush to find Caleb, Frankie hadn't even realized it was missing. And there, in the center of the room, stood a music stand, her microphone, and a brand new pop filter. She eyed a plug-in air freshener and realized that the shed even smelled like sugar cookies. "Caleb?" She called his name as if he were hidden in the room somewhere. Then she called him again as she walked back out into the snow. She was just about to climb the stairs to the deck when she heard a voice mumble, "Hey, Frank." She turned back and saw Caleb sitting in a lawn chair at the edge of the woods, no coat, with a beer bottle in his hand. "Caleb?" She started toward him slowly. "Baby, what are you doing out here?" "I was finishing your Christmas present. Then Dave called and I just needed to sit a minute." Frankie wasn't sure which thing she should respond to first, but ultimately landed on gesturing awkwardly toward her new recording studio, saying, It's incredible. The shed. What you did. I realized it might give you some peace of mind to have a studio here, especially considering we didn't know how long we'd have to stay. Plus, I left the necklace I bought you at home." He paused a moment and stared out into the forest. "Anyway, it turned out I was wrong about the studio. It wasn't that hard to source a few soundproofing materials." "How did you get a pop filter here so fast?" "One of those apps for selling old stuff. Some guy down in the foothills had one and actually wanted to drive up to meet me. He said it had been too long since he'd been in Wylde Valley. So I borrowed Clint's car and met him at the Bear Paw this morning. Cool guy. We actually hit it off, hung out for a while." Of course, the answer to the stranger mystery was something so simple, so kind and wholesome and not at all catastrophic. She squatted beside his chair and looked at the shed. "You even made it smell nice." "Yeah, there was a pretty distinctive deer pee fragrance outside the front door. Just trying to override that." Frankie studied his face. He always gave so little away. Without 10 years of experience and the barely perceptible motion of his lower jaw as he bit the inside of his cheek, she might not have known how extremely not okay he was. It was then that she noticed his sock feet planted in the snow. "Caleb, baby, where are your shoes?" "I took them off in the shed. It was warm enough with the space heater." "But the snow." "I can't feel it, to be honest." Frankie leapt to her feet. "Because you're in shock, that doesn't mean you don't need shoes." She ran to the shed to grab his shoes, then rushed inside and came out with a blanket, a towel, and 2 pairs of socks. She grabbed a second lawn chair off the deck as she hurried back toward him. Caleb didn't resist or help as she knelt in the snow before him, propping one foot on each of her thighs. He only watched, expressionless. She removed each sock and dried his feet by wrapping them side by side in the towel. Frankie squeezed both feet, then freed one from the towel, rubbing her hands over it to warm it. The work of it quieted her mind, the single focused task of protecting him from his own grief. She slipped 2 socks on each foot and laced up his shoes. Then she dragged her lawn chair closer to him. "I brought a blanket," she said, holding up the wool throw as if to cover him with it. "I'm fine," he said. She nodded and sat down, spreading the blanket over her lap. She thought about reaching for his hand, then decided against it. After a moment of quiet, she said, "I shouldn't have left." "Why did you?" She sat back against the chair now, pulling her legs up onto the seat and arranging the blanket so half of it was still free for Caleb, should he change his mind. "I was having a panic attack. I felt like it would be better for you if I just worked it out on my own. Then I could come back and be strong for you when I was steady again." He finally looked at her then. "Our house burned down, Frankie," he said. The words hung heavy in the air between them. "I know. You're not going to be steady for a long time." "Someday." "Sure, but not today." "I'm hanging in there." Sometime tonight, you're going to spill a drink or remember something you lost in the fire, or I'm going to say the wrong thing and you'll be, so what, I shouldn't have come back? No, you should stop leaving. There's no point. And when you walk away from me, you just... His jaw tightened around the words he wasn't saying. I make it worse, Frankie said gently. I make it harder than it has to be. He nodded. She nodded too. I've been afraid of becoming someone who couldn't make you happy, she said. Of already being someone who just makes your world sadder, darker. Caleb sighed and ran his hands over his face. I'm not happy, Frankie. Not right now. I just lost my house. My wife is sad and afraid all the time. And my mother-in-law... She heard the catch in his voice and reached for his hand. He let her hold it, but he didn't hold back. Caleb cleared his throat. She's your mom, but I know. I mean, it's easier than it was, and I know it's easier for me than for you. We don't need to weigh and compare. A loss is a loss. Caleb looked at her then. This is the least happy I have ever been. I will be happy again later, but I'm not right now. And I need that to be okay, just like you do. I understand. She squeezed his hand. Do you think you could tell me that more often? That you're unhappy, I mean? You want me to remind you that I'm unhappy? Are we talking like daily or... I'd use the word confide. When you don't talk to me about it, I feel like you're not talking because the problem is me. No, I mean, sometimes it is, but most of the time I'm just afraid that if I pile on, your anxiety will get worse. I actually think it might help. I need an opportunity to take care of you too, and I need to know that these things are also hard for you. It will help me feel less crazy and not so useless. Caleb finally closed his fingers around her hand. You're not crazy, he said softly. You're definitely not useless. You do feel a lot of things that I don't understand. And it's true that there are a lot of things I enjoy more than having to talk you down from a ledge just because the tone of my sneeze made you think I was mad at you. I told you it wasn't the sneeze itself, a game of ping pong, for example. That's more fun. A night at the movies. I prefer that too. Even spending a 7-hour flight in the middle seat would, oh my God, okay, I get it. She dropped his hand and hugged her knees in close to her chest. Caleb stared at her, a smile playing at the corners of his lips. But I'm not a goldfish, Francis. I don't experience your panic attacks like they're singular moments suspended in time. And I don't suddenly forget where we've been or that there are easier days ahead. And I don't suddenly forget who you are, like the whole person who I pledged my life to. Frankie wiped a wet cheek across her knee. I forget who I am, she said. I feel like all I am now is this quivering mass of raw nerves. Gross. He used his thumb to brush away the tears she missed. No, he said. You're kind. You're smart and funny, and a lot stronger than you think. I haven't been funny in so long. You'll get it back. It's part of you. Just like whatever internal impulse compels you to verbally greet every squirrel you see, and the way you have to pause every movie in the middle to dissect a plot hole. That ridiculous hip swivel dance you do to celebrate something good happening to someone else. How even in the toughest times you worry about the way your pain affects me. You see, you are not your anxiety. Not to me. You can't be because I know all of you. Yeah, loving you is sometimes less fun than ping pong, but it's always the more rewarding choice. Frankie buried her face in her knees. The tears were coming fast now. She felt Caleb's hand squeeze the back of her neck. Hey, he said. Are you hearing me? She nodded, face still buried in her knees. She felt him tug on her arm, directing her to get up. He drew her onto his lap and wrapped the blanket around them both. She felt him attempt to smooth down her wild hair, probably trying to get it out of his face and probably failing. They sat in silence, watching new snowflakes dust the roots of the sugar pine trees. "How are you doing?" Frankie asked. "I'm okay," he said. "Hanging in there." She sighed. He sighed. "Yeah, okay," he said. "I'm freaking out, Frankie." "There we go." "It's all gone. All of it. Every photograph, every letter, everything we've ever bought or received or built together. We lost it all. The magnitude of this is so... I can't even comprehend it." "I know." She combed her fingers through the hair over his ear. "The weirdest objects come to mind." "Right?" She lifted her head to look at him. "My first thought when Dave called, my very first thought was, oh my God, my baseball cards. As in the one binder of baseball cards I have in a box in the attic somewhere. They're not even worth anything. I thought of your Casablanca poster. The one you gave me hell for keeping?" Frankie shrugged and rested her head on his chest. "At least we saved the dulcimer." "Yes," Caleb said, kissing her head. "We do have that much." Chapter 7. It was not a magical Christmas Eve, but it was a Christmas Eve that tried. Frankie made peppermint hot chocolate and sat Caleb down in the kitchen so they could make a to-do list, deciding which tasks each of them would handle. It was agreed that there'd be no pressure to be productive or not be productive on Christmas Day, that those who needed time to feel feelings could, and those who needed the distraction of a task could get to work. After they ironed out the practicalities and put a garbage bag over the now open window of the Subaru, they turned on Ella Fitzgerald and dug into the storage boxes under the tree. As they hung the ornaments, Frankie told him the stories they represented for her, many of which he already knew. As the evening wore on, she got around to telling him about her conversation with Coralie and the things she now knew about her father. "Do you think you'll go meet him?" he asked. "I don't know," she said. "I'm just trying to take life one shocking revelation at a time right now." Before the night was over, she had one sizable panic attack, triggered by the realization that she had packed her second favorite pajamas and not her first favorite. Of course it wasn't about the pajamas. It was about what the pajamas represented, and for that part of the evening the world was too delicate to navigate, threatening to crack and splinter beneath her feet if she tried to take a step forward. She was impossible to love, Caleb deserved better, and she felt desperate to get away, give him space. She stayed anyway. She let him hold her and tell her why life was every bit as beautiful as she'd once believed. She reminded herself that this was love on his part, not charity or obligation. And even though the loudest part of her didn't believe that for a second, she put her faith in the judgment of her quieter self, the part of herself that was right and real, if a little beaten down and hoarse. As a result, this Christmas Eve concluded like their better Christmas Eves, with Frankie and Caleb snuggled together in front of a crackling fire, sipping whiskey until Caleb's steady breath became a rugged snore. Frankie slipped the glass out of his hand, nudged him awake, and guided him upstairs. Christmas morning arrived quietly, its dawning light creeping through the windows of a cafe where a tiny woman was frying up a last-minute batch of buñuelos. A few blocks away, a puffy-eyed woman in a terry cloth robe sat at her kitchen table to scrawl out a thank-you note. "The scarf your mother gave me is very nice. Holidays are tough. Hang in there. Veronica." High in the hills, a round-faced, sharp-tongued, warm-hearted woman smeared on a little lipstick before heading out for Christmas brunch with a man she supposedly could not stand. She got into her Jeep with an elegantly wrapped package in hand, planning to leave the gift, and the right to determine the gift's fate, on a young woman's doorstep. On the other side of that particular doorstep, Cassie Rose's daughter popped the top off of a dry erase marker and drew a wide, round 0. She stepped back to admire her work. 0 days since the last catastrophe, and she was still here to love and be loved. This concludes Holiday Gifts for Insufferable People, written by Abby Werdeman and read for you by the author. To discover more books by Abby Werdeman, visit Abby, spelled ABI, reviewstheworld.com. That's ABI, reviewstheworld.com.